Okay, we are ready.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to the San Bruno City Council meeting. It's regular meeting of June the 23rd, 2020. Madam Clerk, could you please take roll?
Councilmember Davis?
Here.
Councilmember Medina?
Here.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
Here.
Mayor Medina?
Here.
And Councilmember Mason should be joining us shortly.
You're correct. Thank you. If you would all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, I would appreciate it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Mayor Medina, it does look like Councilmember Mason has joined us.
I see her. She is. All right, let's move on to public comment for items that are not on the agenda. So individuals are allowed up to 3 minutes. It is the council's policy to refer matters raised in this forum to staff for investigation and or action where appropriate. The Brown Act prohibits the council from discussing or acting upon any matter not agendized pursuant to state law. Again, this is for items that are not on the agenda. And Melissa, I'll let you take over.
Yes, the first hand we have is Ryan Marsney. Ryan, just one moment while I bring you over. Hi, Ryan, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
Well, I know the subject matter is later in the agenda. I'm not sure public comments will be allowed at that time. I'm speaking to support CityNet Services expanding GigaFiber service to the entire city. I've been a proponent of the expansion for years. Might I suggest we need to do this as soon as possible? We have had 2 major studies favorable for expansion. While I am not faulting the city for not having expansion in place during COVID-19, imagine how much farther our city would have been ahead with all the people working at home that could have signed up. I think we can agree the likelihood of more and more people working from home in the future will require GigaFiber for productivity. The question is financing. I suggest a few options. Mortgage and or sell the cable building on, mortgage and or sell the cable building on El Camino. If we were to sell it, we should get over $7 million based on the sale of the Salvation Army sale per square foot. We could mortgage the building until we find a buyer. Sale of the cable building will eventually give us impact fees and property taxes as well. If we need to borrow the money or portions of the money, maybe we can ask the SBC, the San Bruno Community Foundation, for a loan. I would prefer to pay interest to ourselves than a bank. We could get a loan outright or float a bond. In times of economic difficulty, it is a proven economic strategy that we invest in infrastructure to create jobs. Building out our fiber will accomplish that, plus provide future revenue. I strongly urge you to embark on the building of out of GigaFiber network in San Bruno as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Just one moment. The next person we have is Tony. Just one moment, Tony, while I unmute you. Tony, I'm trying to unmute you. Just one moment.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, there you are.
Oh, okay. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. Thank you for taking my questions here. Actually, I'm a longtime resident of San Bruno, and you'll have to forgive me. I didn't review the agenda. These items may be on the agenda. If so, I'll get my answers then. But 2 questions. With the pandemic going around, and I know the governor put something in place about mandated wearing masks in public, what is San Bruno's stance and what are they considered public places? Because I see people all the time going around without masks, and that's kind of a concern to me. I'm one of those guys. And my second question is, and this might be on the agenda, is the fireworks happening, the illegals, not the legals, the illegals, bombs, mortars, and all that that's setting off car alarms and sprinkling all over our houses and stuff. So with all respect, I appreciate those couple of minutes, and those are the two questions that are on my mind.
Thank you, Tony.
I don't see any other hands up at this time.
Okay. All right. With that, we'll move on to announcements and presentations, where I think Tony might have a couple of those things addressed or at least talked about. The first one is item A, help San Bruno's census for 2020, completion rate to 100%. The city is currently at 70.3%. You can submit your census online at my2020census.gov or by calling 1-844-330-2020. Again, that's 1-844-330-2020. And it is important, other cities in the community of our county, even though the county is doing the best in the state, we are still behind in the others. It is easy, it is quick, it doesn't ask for a lot of personal information, so we really encourage, the council encourages you, it's important for the next 10 years as far as funding and acknowledgement of our community. With that, we'll move on to item B, receive update on COVID-19 response efforts. City Manager.
Good afternoon, members of the City Council and the public. My name is Javon Grogan. I am the City Manager, and I will provide us with a brief update on COVID-19. So I believe the PowerPoint is up. So our agenda today is a brief update on countywide stats and positive cases in the city of San Bruno. Next, we want to talk about the replacement of our local shelter in place order with the state-wide order. And we will talk a little bit about a word of caution from our local county health officer, as well as talk about the resumption of street and parking enforcement. So the slide that is before you, those of you that have seen these presentations, it will be familiar. It is directly from the county health department's website. What it shows is, as of the last time the data was updated, there are 2,901 total positive cases in the county. That is a 5% positivity rate on the number of tests that are being conducted, and the community and the council may remember that early on the positivity rate was approximately 10%. There have been a total of 104 deaths. This is updated from 93 deaths the last time I gave the community an update, which was 2 weeks ago at our prior council meeting on June 29th, or on June 9th. Countywide stats, just showing this slide once again. This is data by city, and so we know that there are 125 positive cases in the city of San Bruno. But the shading on this map shows us that our positivity rate and number is lower than our surrounding cities of both Millbrae and South San Francisco, and that has been a trend that is continuing. A little bit quickly about the shelter-in-place order. I think we all know that effective June 17th, the County of San Mateo's order was rescinded and replaced with the state order, and there's a link here to the state resiliency roadmap. And the statewide order currently limits gatherings to no more than 50 people. It requires all businesses to implement social distancing protocol and health and safety plans, reopens all businesses, but still encourages employees that can work from home to continue working from home. Allows social bubbles. Social bubbles are generally defined as social gatherings of 12 or fewer people, and that group should agree to be in that social bubble for at least 3 weeks. And so if you're having a gathering at your house, 12 or fewer people, and remain in that bubble for 3 weeks. And so don't have multiple parties with multiple groups of 12. And social distancing and face coverings when out in public remains in effect. A few other things for a list of the allowable businesses. There are dine-in restaurants, hair salons, and barbershops are now open. I know that was a question of council. Casinos, family entertainment centers, restaurants, wineries, bars, zoos, gyms, fitness centers, hotels, for tourism and individual travel, card rooms and racetracks, campgrounds, and outdoor recreation, and nail salons, body waxing, tattoo parlors were all allowed to resume effective June 19th. And so a word of caution from our health officer is up, and I will read that. Our county health officer, Scott Morrill, said, we are moving away from opening businesses. We are moving away from opening businesses according to certain categories and instead focusing on behaviors and practices. As we ease these restrictions, the power to control the spread of the virus lies with individuals and communities. Collective behavior will determine our destiny. Even though people, businesses, and organizations in the community do not follow protective recommendations, the virus may spread. If enough people and businesses or organizations in the community do not follow protective recommendations, the virus may spread. Okay, so next, street sweeping and parking enforcement, something that the city council has asked about and the public has asked about, and we have pushed this out on social media. And parking enforcement and street sweeping enforcement will resume on July 6th, and so everyone should be mindful of that. We did suspend parking and street sweeping enforcement early on in the shelter-in-place, and now with businesses opening and more people about in the community, we feel that it's appropriate for people to move their cars during normal street sweeping days and to begin enforcement of those regulations, and so that will begin. Again, stay connected on all of our various social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have the city's coronavirus website, our normal city web address, www.sanbruno.ca.gov/coronavirus. You can find press releases, statements, and all of these PowerPoints that contains links to all of the information that we have shared every 2 weeks beginning since the shelter-in-place took effect. With that, open for questions from the City Council, if there are any.
There are any questions? Marty, Mr. Councilmember Medina.
Yes, thank you. For the 72-hour parking enforcement, is that restarting again?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
City manager, and then we'll go to Laura. Just very quick, one of our speakers asked about what the stance is in regards to wearing face coverings, masks.
Individuals in the state of California, everywhere in the state of California, per the governor's order, should wear masks when they are out in public and stay approximately 6 feet away.
And that's for the entire state of California, not just San Bruno, not just the county.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
And then just to piggyback on that question, what about exercising? Because I guess that's the conflict, right? So if you're out running around, you don't need to be, you have the option to not wear it.
It is encouraged, but not required. Early on, the requirements were lifted, so if you were out exercising, very broadly defined, even walking could be considered exercise, and you have the option of not wearing a face mask when exercising. But the governor's order says that when out in public, everyone must wear a face mask. There is the exemption for exercising, which makes it hard to enforce, and issue, for example, citations for people not wearing a face mask because one can say, well, I was exercising and walking. And so there are challenges to logistical enforcement, which is why our local county health officer and just about everyone is saying our collective actions will really dictate our collective safety. And so we're asking everybody to abide by the rules as much as possible. But you are right, there is that exemption for exercising.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members? And again, the face mask at this time is required by the state order. So it's not if I feel like it, it is required. Other than the exercising, correct, City Manager?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to item C, receive annual oral report from the San Bruno Community Foundation.
I brought over Leslie Hadamiya from the Community Foundation. Leslie, do you need me to bring over Chair Roberts?
No, I think she will be handling the whole presentation.
Okay.
Will you be sharing my slides, or should I be doing that?
If you have them ready, you can.
Okay. Okay, good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council members. My name is Leslie Hadamiya, and for the past 5.5 years, I've had the privilege of being the Executive Director of the San Bruno Community Foundation. Thank you for this opportunity this evening to share with the Council the Foundation's highlights over the past year. Once again, we've been very busy administering a broad array of programs that benefit the San Bruno community, utilizing the restitution funds resulting from the tragic 2010 gas pipeline explosion. As we approach the 10th anniversary of the explosion, it's helpful to reflect on the origins of the funds the Foundation administers and the circumstances in which we find ourselves today. The Foundation was born out of disaster and tragedy, and it is important and appropriate that the Foundation step up and support our community in this current time of disaster and tragedy. The Foundation has dedicated $500,000 to COVID-19 relief efforts in our local community. And at our last board meeting earlier this month, President Emily Roberts articulated the Foundation's outrage over the senseless killing of George Floyd and the many other people of color whose lives have been taken or harmed by systemic injustice and abuse of power. She also acknowledged the platform and privilege the Foundation holds in our diverse community. We are hopeful that the renewed focus on the persistence of systemic racism will lead to desperately needed progress, and we pledge to find meaningful ways to better support this healing. So let me begin my recap of the Foundation's past year by highlighting the COVID-19 relief initiatives the Foundation spearheaded this spring, totaling an investment of $500,000. San Bruno, as you all know, is the city with a heart, and as we saw with the gas pipeline explosion 10 years ago, this community is resilient and strong. The Community Foundation is in the fortunate position of being able to provide assistance to important segments of our community that are in need. When we looked to see how we could truly make a meaningful impact, two areas that affect so many in our community stood out: our schools and our small businesses. In developing this package of grants, we were led by the guiding principles that our board articulated 5 years ago when we first created our program strategy. In particular, the Foundation's ability to respond quickly and flexibly to address the critical needs of the community in partnership with key community stakeholders is critical in the face of a global pandemic that has brought tremendous hardship and uncertainty to our current circumstance. So with regard to the schools, the first COVID relief program we supported was back in April, when the city and the San Bruno Education Foundation approached us about a joint effort to provide free internet access through San Bruno CityNet services to low-income San Bruno students. The foundation contributed $10,000 to this effort, joining the city, the Rotary Club, and the Police Association in underwriting the costs of this program. The second program serving our public schools is the Teacher Laptop Initiative. When I first reached out to the San Bruno Park School District's interim superintendent and asked her to identify the district's highest priority need that the foundation could help with right now. She quickly said new laptops for all of the district's teachers to support them in this new era of distance learning. She said that when the district first was confronted with distance learning, it focused on the students, making sure that they had devices at home and internet access. What the district quickly discovered, however, was that many of the teachers were lacking the necessary technology to support the sudden and dramatic transition to online instruction that they were being asked to make. Our $240,000 grant to the San Bruno Education Foundation ensures that every district teacher from preschool to grade 8, as well as some support staff, will receive a new work MacBook. And then there's small businesses that we're helping. The foundation is taking a two-pronged approach in assisting San Bruno's lively and eclectic small business community as they attempt to survive the disastrous impacts of COVID-19. For the first prong, the foundation provided a $150,000 grant to the San Mateo County Strong Small Business Grant Program. Our grant is enabling 15 small businesses in San Bruno to receive $10,000 grants to help them stay afloat during this time. The second prong of our approach is to fund a program run through the Bay Area Entrepreneur Center of Skyline College to provide free technical, business, and financial assistance to San Bruno small businesses in need. This $100,000 grant is leveraging the Entrepreneur Center's partnerships with the San Bruno Chamber of Commerce, Skyline College's accounting department, the Renaissance Center, SCORE, and the Small Business Development Center. The Small Business Recovery and Assistance Program is currently recruiting participants, so if you know of any local businesses that could use this assistance, please refer them to Bayek and Saida Stroud. We are hopeful that these 4 COVID relief initiatives will make a meaningful difference in San Bruno. In addition to the COVID relief grants, let me say that I've been personally privileged and honored to serve as a member of the city's EOC team these past few months at the invitation of City Manager Javon Grogan. I've viewed firsthand the dedication of the city's senior leadership and EOC team in dealing with the constantly changing landscape due to COVID-19. The foundation and I are grateful for the opportunity to partner with the city to provide volunteer coordination as well as resources for small businesses, nonprofits, and community members in need. So let me also briefly mention some of the other strategic grants this foundation has provided this past year. Of course, the most notable is the design and construction of the city's new Recreation and Aquatics Center, to which the foundation has committed $50 million. The decision to fund this project came after a thorough and thoughtful process the city conducted that included considerable community engagement and has had broad community support. As you know, we are funding the project with a series of individual grants covering different components of the project. Thus far, we have approved 4 grants totaling about $8 million, covering conceptual design, architectural services, project and construction management, and most recently, a package of city compliance review expenses. We look forward to the next steps in this process, securing temporary facilities, developing the business and operation plan, and most notably, hiring the contractor and breaking ground on this much needed community resource with the commencement of the construction phase early next year. Another key partnership with the city has been the First Responder Effectiveness Strategic Initiative. As you may recall, the first part of this initiative was a set of 3 projects aimed at enhancing the effectiveness of San Bruno's first responders: police mindfulness training, emergency shelter supplies, and critical facilities site assessments, action plans, and training. Then, after the April 2018 shooting at YouTube's headquarters, Google.org and employees of both Google and YouTube contributed more than $300,000 to our first responder efforts. And last year, the foundation approved a grant to cover the acquisition and construction of a mobile command vehicle for the city using these funds. The city is waiting to receive the vehicle as built to city specifications, and we look forward to the city being able to use this valuable first responder resource in our community. One final strategic grant I want to mention is the Music Education Strategic Initiative. This was originally envisioned as a 3-year, $500,000 investment to make music education a hallmark of San Bruno's public schools. Due to the challenges facing the San Bruno Park School District with its current leadership transition, as well as a challenging fundraising environment created by COVID-19 and other recent circumstances, the foundation extended the initiative to a 4th year, giving another $60,000 to the San Bruno Education Foundation and $8,000 to the Cappuccino High School Alumni Association to ensure that this initiative continues and that the schools and supporting organizations will be able to sustain the programs after foundation funding sunsets. In addition to our strategic grant making, we also run 2 in-house programs. The first is the Community Grants Fund, which allows local community groups to apply for grant funding of up to $25,000 for programs that benefit the San Bruno community. At the end of 2019, we awarded our 4th set of community grants, which totaled $300,000, thanks in part to a generous $100,000 donation from YouTube and Google.org. The 29 grants went to a diverse set of community groups, as you can see from the slide, from Cora to Rape Trauma Services, to the Society of West Coast Artists, to the San Bruno 4-H Club. The city received 1 community grant this year for the Narita Sister City Exchange Program. And since the exchange wasn't able to take place this year due to COVID-19, we've extended the grant period and the city will be able to use the grant in 2021 when we hope the exchange will be able to resume. We will launch our 5th Community Grants Fund cycle at the beginning of July with an application deadline of September 30th. I'm happy to let you know that YouTube and Google.org are again contributing $100,000 to this program. And so with $200,000 of our own funds, the foundation will award another $300,000 in community grants in December. Our final program is the Crestmore Neighborhood Memorial Scholarship, which we launched in 2016 to honor the community members most directly affected by the 2010 gas pipeline explosion. This scholarship assists San Bruno students who have demonstrated a deep commitment to the San Bruno community with the cost of attending college. Earlier this month, we awarded our 5th set of college scholarships totaling $190,000 to 13 impressive high school and community college students. We are especially grateful this year to the Welch family and the Joseph W. Welch Jr. Foundation for its generous $70,000 donation to the program. We also thank all of those who were able to attend our scholarship presentation, which was still heartfelt even on Zoom and not in person. And we're especially grateful to Mayor Medina for congratulating the Crestmore Scholars on behalf of the city. These impressive young people are inspiring, and especially at this point in time, they give us great hope for the future. In accordance with our bylaws, the Council's consent calendar this evening includes the Foundation's fiscal year 2021 budget, which the Foundation Board approved on June 3rd. A few words about the budget. The expenses include nearly $43 million in direct program disbursements, including $42 million for the remaining Recreation and Aquatic Center grants, including the construction grant, and about $250,000 available for additional COVID relief, racial justice, or other strategic grants, with the balance for scholarships, community grants, and we hope Community Day 2021. We also estimate about $40,000 in support costs. From the beginning, we've been extremely conscious to keep our administrative expenses low. We are very leanly staffed. I've been the only employee for 5.5 years, supported mainly by 2 very part-time part-time consultants, an accountant who does our books, and a program manager who helps with the Community Grants Fund and the Crestmore Scholarship. This year, we are having to convert our program manager from consultant status to employee status as required by AB 5, the gig work bill that was enacted by the state of California last fall. The increase in our staff salary line that you may have noticed in the budget is primarily the result of this reclassification from consultant to employee. We do not show investment income for our investment accounts in our budget. The board designates the payout or amount to transfer from our investment accounts to cover the year's cash flow needs. Thus, what the budget shows are the funds actually available for operations. It shows that we are taking a 1.7% payout from the quasi-endowment, or just under $300,000, with the balance needed to cover our cash needs for the year of about $16 million, and that's mainly going to grant payments for the Recreation Aquatic Center, coming from our strategic pool and the part of our liquidity pool earmarked for the rec center. Our budget also does not reflect the totality of our investment holdings, but I'd like you to know that even with the market volatility we've experienced as a result of the pandemic over the past couple of months, as of May 31st, 2020, our total assets exceeded $74.7 million. And I checked our account balances earlier today, and total right now is above $75 million. We respectfully ask the City Council to approve the Foundation's fiscal year 2021 budget. This action will allow the Foundation to continue moving forward on its current trajectory to use the restitution funds to enhance the quality of life for all of us in San Bruno. Before I close, I'd like to acknowledge by name our current board members who have been key to the Foundation's success. President Emily Roberts, Vice President Jim Ruane, Secretary John McLaughlin, Treasurer Tim Ross, and board members Raul Gomez, Nancy Kraus, and Melissa Natani-Jones. I'd also like to thank the key city staff members who have supported us tremendously over the past year. In particular, City Manager Javon Grogren, City Attorney Mark Zaffarano, former Community Services Director Joanne Magrini, Finance Director Keith DiMartini, Community and Economic Development Director Darcy Smith, Assistant to the City Manager Jennifer Dianos, and the City Clerk's Office. During the shelter in place, we are especially grateful to the assistance of City Clerk Melissa Thurman and IT staffer Paul Vella in helping us run our meetings on Zoom. So that's the Foundation over the past 12 months. I hope you'll agree that we have had another busy and productive year in service to our community. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation and report. Are there any comments or questions from council at this time? If seeing none, thank you again, Leslie, and I'm sure you'll be standing by for under consent.
I think you might have had one.
All right, hold on. Some hands went up. First, Councilmember Davis, and then Councilmember Mason.
Leslie, thank you for an excellent presentation. I really appreciate that. I'm sure a lot of residents don't really understand how much work that goes into this foundation. $70 million originally was handed over to the foundation to invest and to give back to our community, and what a great thing that we've continued to do. And balances today of well over another additional $5 million. So and you don't have to be exact, but could you give me a ballpark about how much money has actually been in total given back to our community?
Ooh, I don't have that number off the top of my head, and I can calculate that and get back to you with that.
No worries.
But we've had our expenses paid over the past 5 years, as well as we've probably given out in grants several $1 million. We've been giving $120,000 to $190,000 in scholarships each year. We've been giving $300,000 in community grants each year. The first year we gave $200,000, and since then it's been $300,000. So it's been probably another, just ballpark figures, it's several more million that we've dispersed or spent in operating expenses. Plus, we're now at about 75 million total.
Councilmember Mason.
Hi.
What's that?
Is this the time to ask questions
No,
on the resolution, or is it, or should I wait till consent calendar?
That should be wait to under consent if it's dealing with the budget. Yes, this is questions or comments in regards to the presentation.
Okay, so then just for the presentation, just thank you, Leslie, and to the board. And I appreciate that you thanked Melissa and Javon and Mark. I was on one of the recent calls, and I know that they're giving additional time to the Community Foundation, which I think is great. So thank you for all your work this year.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Seeing no more hands up from council, we'll move on to the next item under presentations, which is item D. Receive presentation from the fire and police chiefs regarding the city's requirements for the use of safe and sane fireworks in San Bruno and San Bruno's zero tolerance policy. We'll first turn it over to Chief Johansson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Ryan Johansson. I am your Chief of Police, and I'm going to give a brief presentation on our preparations and what we're doing for the 4th of July, fireworks enforcement, and other details for 2020. I will also be joined by Fire Chief Ari DeLay, but we've only got a few slides, so I'll give the presentation itself, and Chief DeLay will be available for any questions or comments that relate specifically to the fire operations. So I know we have a lot on the agenda. I'll try to dig right in here. First, covering some of the preparations that we've made for 4th of July this year. First of all, all department personnel are ordered to work the 4th of July. This has been consistent with the last several years, where we cancel all vacation requests and all time off, and all staff are required to work on the 4th of July. Many are working patrol assignments that are part of their normal duties, but everyone who is not already working the 4th will be doing so in a special detail enforcement capacity. We've already completed the incident action plan for this year. This is a fairly robust process that involves integration with fire in order to determine how we will deploy our assets in advance of the 4th of July, which incorporates all of our social media outreach and public information campaign, in addition to our actual enforcement activities and our education activities in the days leading up to the 4th. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about that as we move on here. We have or are in the process of finalizing a joint fire and police public safety announcement, which will air not only on Channel 1, but which will be broadcasted via social media and our other different channels that enable us public outreach. This will basically be an education piece that not only informs the community about the different laws relating to the use of safe and sane fireworks and the prohibited use of illegal fireworks, but kind of gives them some insight as to how to tell the difference between the two, and what to expect in terms of consequences and ramifications in the event that they are caught using illegal fireworks or improperly using safe and sane fireworks. So that should be forthcoming fairly soon in the next couple of days. We've also already conducted our mandatory safety meeting. This is joint between police and fire and is conducted with all booth operators, so all of the different nonprofits that will be selling fireworks at booths. Their staff are required to go through a mandatory safety meeting where we discuss all the ins and outs of safely operating the booth, setting up the booth, not only from the obvious fire safety perspective, because when you've got all of these fireworks on site, that is a major concern, but also just from a general public safety perspective. We give them some insight as to what to look out for around the booths in order to avoid counterfeit bill usage, credit card fraud, theft, and some of the other things that can come along with running these booths. So that has already been completed. We will be working with fire to issue informational warning notices at all city facilities, so that anytime someone is conducting business with the city, this is sort of front and center for them, and they'll be able to see kind of what our enforcement policy and posture will be for the year. Continuing through this, every year the police department makes contact at known violation locations in an effort to sort of preempt some of the activity that we don't want to see. So we've been doing this for a number of years now. We have some recurring locations that tend to be problem locations year after year. And we try to reach out to those locations ahead of time and remind them of the consequences, and hopefully just gain some general compliance from them ahead of time. This has been fairly effective with some locations and not so much, as I'm sure residents can attest, with others that unfortunately create headaches for them year after year. But it still is something that we do every single year to get out ahead of time and try to head off these problems before they start. Something kind of new this year is, as we're learning to use our data sources more effectively, we now have been using our current CAD RMS system since 2014, which means we have a lot of data. And this has enabled us to structure some of our enforcement activities a little bit differently this year, where we are generating essentially heat maps that show where our biggest concentration of calls for service, citations, and unruly gathering complaints come from. And we can target our enforcement efforts and put more resources in the areas where we tend to have more problems. And so hopefully this will enable us to be a little bit more effective this year than we have in years past by taking a little bit more of a data-driven approach to how we allocate our limited resources on the 4th and in advance of the 4th as well. Fire will have an extra engine company on duty for response every year, inevitably. I know that fire is very busy with the added calls that come with the 4th of July celebration, be it brush fires, house fires, smoke investigations, the whole litany of things that they have to deal with on the 4th, in addition to supporting police's efforts for enforcement. And so they bring on an entire extra engine company to facilitate that. All fire prevention staff will also be on duty, taking a more proactive approach to heading off some of the problem areas ahead of time and kind of canvassing those areas to try to keep fireworks away from the spots where we know that fires can start quickly and easily. So use of safe and sane fireworks. This is an issue that obviously the city of San Bruno allows the use and sale of safe and sane fireworks. I'd like to just take a couple of bullet points here to touch on what those are and how to tell the difference. You'll see the seal here that appears on the right side of your screen. This is the State Fire Marshal seal that designates a firework as safe and sane. Believe it or not, every year, be it truthful or not, we have several individuals who end up receiving $1,000 administrative citations for using illegal fireworks, and they claim that they bought them at what they thought was a reputable place, and they didn't know they were illegal. So it's good to inform the public that if this seal does not appear on a firework, it is probably illegal, and you can be cited for possessing and or using it within our city limits. So this is the seal that you always want to be looking for. In more general terms, essentially, if it flies in the air or it explodes, it is illegal. So we do have some fountains and things like that that will emit sparks into the air, but if it shoots a projectile or it creates an explosion, it is probably illegal and should not be used. Use of these fireworks is permitted starting on the 28th of June from noon to 9 p.m. And then on the 4th, those hours expand a little bit from noon until 11 p.m. So sometimes we get calls in because people say, oh, the fireworks are being used today. It's not the 4th of July yet. The municipal code does actually allow for them to be used starting on the 28th at noon and running through to 11 p.m. on the 4th of July with some hours in the evening where they're not permitted. Use on private property only, and they must be at least 10 feet away from structures. So there is no use permitted in parks and public parking lots, technically not even allowed on city streets, although this is something that we all know is fairly commonplace. Our enforcement posture has been to really try to focus on enforcing the use of illegal fireworks as opposed to the low-level misuse of safe and sane. The feeling is that for a lot of folks to get 10 feet away from a structure, which is the most important component of using safe and sane, the street or the end of the driveway ends up being a fairly safe alternative. So generally speaking, as long as folks are respectful of traffic traveling on the streets, we do not proactively enforce the use of safe and sane fireworks in a safe manner on city streets as long as they're, again, not creating other issues or obstructions. Again, not permitted at all in any of our parks, any public parking lots, any schools, or any open space areas. And we do canvass those pretty thoroughly on the 4th of July and will remove folks from those areas if they're even using safe and sane fireworks. Please remember that misuse of safe and sane fireworks is dangerous and illegal. We have numerous occurrences of this almost every year where folks are cutting open fireworks and concentrating them, or they're throwing them or misusing them in ways that make them dangerous, and it is illegal to do so, and you can be cited for that as well. And now we'll talk briefly about illegal fireworks enforcement. So again, all PD staff will be working the 4th of July really with the sole aim of canvassing the town and ensuring that as much enforcement of illegal fireworks use as possible is being conducted. We will have marked units, unmarked units, uniformed officers, plainclothes officers, bicycle units, motorcycle units, and we'll be utilizing surveillance teams. Surveillance teams is something that I added into the operations plan last year. It proved to be very effective. This essentially has undercover units conducting surveillance only, not making themselves ever known or seen to the public, and directing in uniformed police to issue citations and conduct enforcement activities. There have even been cases where those units in situations where it's difficult to identify the specific offender will utilize video surveillance in order to capture exactly who is conducting the illegal activities, and citations can be issued after the fact. It is a $1,000 administrative citation for use and or possession of illegal fireworks. There is not a accelerating scale where it starts at 50 or you get a warning. Our enforcement posture has been zero tolerance from the standpoint that if we have what it takes in order to issue a citation, which means that we have directly and personally observed someone possessing and or using illegal fireworks, we will issue the $1,000 administrative citation per San Bruno Muni Code. That's where it starts, and that's essentially where it ends. We did last year implement the social host component of citations. This means that if you are hosting a gathering or a party where illegal fireworks are being used, you can be cited whether you are the person who is lighting, possessing, or using them or not. We did use this on multiple occasions last year. We will not hesitate to use it again this year when appropriate in order to stop the use of illegal fireworks, because that use is dangerous and also hampers the other celebrators that are trying to enjoy the 4th legally and lawfully. So please be on notice that if you are the one hosting a party, you're the homeowner, you're the renter, or you're the person in control of a gathering, we can and will issue you a citation if there are illegal fireworks being used at your party. When it comes to reporting violations, this is a little bit of a departure and a favor that we are asking from the police department of the public this year. In going through the data that I spoke about earlier, we are now able to kind of analyze and see where we are most effective in conducting actual enforcement that results in arrests and citations being issued. And that enforcement is tending to stem from our proactive activities as opposed to vague calls for service from the public. As an example, if you know that fireworks are going off in a general city block or in a general area or even associated with a general residence, but you do not have an actual suspect description for us to work with, calling that in really doesn't do us a tremendous amount of good. We're committed to responding to all the calls for service. So as we get those, we have to take officers who might be working an active area on foot where they have seen them going off, and we have to kind of work our way in to get close enough to make the observations we need to issue a citation. And they often have to go back to their vehicle and leave in order to go field a complaint that is vague, right? We all know that the fireworks illegals are going off all over the community, unfortunately. And so a call that says, hey, on the 300 block of such and such street, there's illegal fireworks going off, is not of tremendous help to us. That being said, when you have very specific observations where you see a specific person that you can describe to us by clothing and other physical descriptions, that is helpful to call those in and we can act upon those. But bear in mind that the officer, in order to issue a citation for this violation, must directly and personally observe the violation. It is not enough for a member of the public to tell us that they saw it. This is essentially a misdemeanor that is written into Muni Code, and for us to conduct enforcement lawfully, we have to observe the violation directly. So again, please do make calls in when you have specific information. When you do not, please resist the urge to call in the vague information, because it really, truthfully, is a distraction from the activities that tend to result in actual enforcement. So with that, that ends my presentation, and I know myself and Chief DeLay are happy to field any questions or comments that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, for your report. Obviously, you are correct, and I know if all of us are watching the news, it's happening in many communities to a higher degree, whether it's because of COVID or et cetera. To our neighbors nearby to the south and to the north, we know that they're also experiencing illegal fireworks. Our Safe and Sane, as you indicated, goes on sale on the 28th. I have got a lot of emails, and it's not just to one area. It's throughout various parts of the community that they're experiencing that type of stuff. So can you update us on what you've heard, what you know as far as the illegals that are going off, or if there's a higher volume that you're aware of? Or I know every community is facing that, and I've heard it.
Yes, I mean, I can certainly say that for this time of year, being this far before the 4th, we have seen an increase this year in reports from the community about illegal fireworks usage. I have no doubt that's because there's an increase in usage and also an increase in reporting with folks being at home and experiencing it more regularly. We're being as responsive as we can, I can assure you that, and I want you to know, we definitely take this as a priority. We have for years, and we sort of put our money where our mouth is in terms of the calling in of all staff. And this doesn't just happen on the 4th, right? For the next several days, starting, in fact, tomorrow, we'll be having proactive overtime enforcement daily. These are units that come in just to handle the fireworks calls for service and to try to be proactive about heading off some of these problems. But to answer your question, Mr. Mayor, I'd say yes, we've already seen an increase this year over previous years in calls for service.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Councilmember Mason? You're on mute. You're on mute, Linda.
Thank you. So thanks for the work. I know this is a crazy season for you guys. I did have a question. I know on our block, we do the Safe and Sane fireworks. It's very enjoyable for all the families in the block. We all pretty much come out. Everyone contributes. One of the issues that comes up every year is the speeding on the streets. Is there anything that we can do legally? Can we put barricades up? Can we do anything on 4th of July to make sure that literally they're done in the middle of the street to keep all the kids safe? Is there anything that can be done to, I guess, alleviate that situation?
So I know that if you want to actually put up barricades that would effectively restrict vehicular traffic, you're going to need to pursue a permit from the city.
Yeah.
Beyond that, however, we have seen these signs that are like the little reflective images of like the shape of children that say, slow down, there's kids. They actually work quite well, has been our experience. So we would encourage that. And then by all means, that's something if you're seeing that occurring down there, that is really, really dangerous on the 4th of July where you've got smoke and fire. I mean, and we've got regulations on how fast we can drive, even to emergency calls. So if you're seeing that in your area, please do call that in. We can go down. We've got these motor units. They're happy to go down there and conduct some radar enforcement and kind of hang out and try to get folks to slow down. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and the parents are keeping an eye, so we're very vigilant. But it is a really nice community event. I just wish the illegal fireworks would stop. But I think we all do. Thank you.
You and me both, ma'am.
Councilmember Davis? You're on mute.
Oh, you know what? I was on mute and then I muted us. Can a resident videotape somebody lighting off the illegal fireworks? And can that be used as evidence?
So the short answer is yes. If the video is occurring in a public place, you have a right to videotape it, and we can use that as evidence. Where things get a little bit dicey here is that, again, this is essentially a misdemeanor written into Muni Code that gets enforced as an administrative violation. And because it gets enforced as an administrative violation, we need direct observation by the officer in order to issue that citation. It doesn't mean that we can't sort of request it on the back end based on the evidence provided by a resident, but that's typically going to require us to submit to the court on what would be a 12677 health and safety code violation as opposed to the administrative violation. And the reason we moved away from this years ago, and the reason that council had the foresight to get this Muni Code written, is because the penalties for those are nothing. The folks were going to court and paying $25 and getting the case dismissed and walking, and so it was having no teeth and stopping the activity. So I think we really want to stick with the administrative violation, which does require the direct observation by the officer. But if we've got a real problem occurring and we're just not able to get what we need to enforce it, and you shoot video, I would say definitely let the PD know about that, and we can consider that other course of action through the health and safety code.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I think all of us are experiencing it, but it's the animals that I feel so bad with. I mean, they just can't handle it. It's really, really hard. So for those of you, if you're listening, you're out there lighting off illegal fireworks, please stop. Thanks so much.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes, thank you. This is actually a question for our city attorney. I'm just passing along a question from a couple people who contacted me about why we couldn't increase the citations as an additional reason for people to not light off the legal ones, and he did provide a response, and I was wondering, Mark, if you could please explain it in your legal ways much better than I could.
City Attorney?
Of course, Councilmember Medina. So there are a couple of answers. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I guess I shouldn't speak into my computer. There are a couple of answers to the question. The first answer is that the $1,000 was selected because it is the highest possible fine for violations that are misdemeanors, and so therefore the administrative fine, the City Council was advised to not set it above that amount, because otherwise you might run into a problem where the court might not enforce it. And the second part of that answer is that while in theory there might be support in state law for raising that administrative fine amount above the $1,000, even if you wanted to ignore the misdemeanor fine amount, the policy concern is that increasing the fine amount actually doesn't necessarily deter people from committing the crime. What it does is incentivize people to challenge the citation. So the higher the fine, the more incentive people have to challenge it, and hence the more resources the city spends to defend that particular fine. So it's just finding the right sweet spot from an enforcement standpoint, and I don't know that we have any evidence that increasing the fine would create a problem, or would create that incentive. And then, sorry, the last thing is that some cities do have very high administrative fines for certain kinds of code violations. And the theory is that, well, let's just charge as much as we possibly can, and until somebody complains about it. And generally we don't follow that philosophy in San Bruno. We try to find what seems to be the right amount for deterring the violation, but that also we don't have a tremendous number of challenges.
Thank you.
And City Attorney, and maybe I had heard at one point when we did increase it from 500 to 1,000 that that's the maximum the state allowed under this, and so therefore to an increase of beyond 1,000 for this particular incident, it would have to come from state, or am I incorrect on that?
Well, the answer is complicated. There is a state law that does address this. It doesn't exactly say that, but the implication of that law is exactly what you said, Mr. Mayor. And so out of an abundance of caution and not wishing to attract undue attention from potential litigants, I think the City Council prudently decided to set the amount at sort of the maximum for what those fines are set at in the criminal law.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Salazar.
I wanted to thank both of the chiefs for the work they've put into the presentation and preparing for this season, and ask that you please pass along my thanks to all the troops out there that are going to be putting in the extra time and spending time away from their families. A couple of years ago, I didn't get to do it last year, but 2 years ago, I went on a ride-along and saw how frustrating it is to you get the calls and you go running off to try to find where it's happening, and by the time you get there, it's over. You see some more going off a few blocks away, and you chase those down, and they're gone. So I definitely see where getting the detailed information is going to be important, and I think people's first reaction when they hear these things going off, and especially in a large volume, is to pick up the phone and call the police. And I saw firsthand how ineffective that is. So I think that's a good campaign, and the more that you can do to get that information out, I think it will definitely help. You mentioned the proactive work that the department does. That there's people that are known offenders that you'll visit ahead of time and basically let them know that enforcement will be in place. And I'm just wondering that if over the period of time where that's been happening, has it proven to be effective in getting people to stop the behavior? And are we seeing new offenders show up every year, or are we still seeing repeat offenders basically still breaking the law year after year?
Yeah, I would say that both are true. It's been very effective with some, and completely ineffective with some others that are probably the residences that we're all aware of, that just every year are kind of a problem for us. And then, the folks get a little more sophisticated too, and now it's, moving down the street from your party to set off the illegal fireworks and running from there, so that we're chasing our tail even a little bit more. But I do think there have been a lot of reasonable residents in town that when you meet with them ahead of time and just say, look, we really, you've got to help us stop this, or we're going to lose this really kind of cool thing that this city has to celebrate this holiday together, that we've had a lot of good, reasonable responses.
Thank you. And City Clerk is letting me know we have a member of the community that wanted to speak. But just and I don't think it was referenced, a lot of folks I know are emailing, why do we allow Safe and Sane? And just as a history, it was 2005 that it went to the ballot in November. that asked, shall it continue, the safe and sane fireworks in the city of San Bruno? It was 65% at that time, 65 point something at that time for those that voted that did approve it. Therefore, the city council cannot stop it or ban it. That has to come from a vote of the people at an election. City clerk, you had somebody with their hand up from the community?
Yes, Josh Goldberg. Just one moment, Josh, while I bring you in the room and unmute you. Hi, Josh, can you hear us?
Yes, hi.
Hello.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I used to live in Santa Cruz. I've seen some pretty devastating fires and injuries from illegal fireworks. So I'm glad that you're doing this enforcement program. One question I have is around your use of data services. There's a lot of implicit bias in these systems and confirmation bias, where hotspots that show up end up getting more patrols, and then more crime is found there as a result, and it kind of feeds on itself. I just want to make sure, or ask, I guess, what are you doing to mitigate these issues with these new services that are being made available? I'm a software engineer. I know these problems because I've made some in the past. So I'm very familiar with the problem, and want to make sure that it's not being misunderstood or ignored here. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Chief, is there anything that you can respond as far as technologies and utilizing? I know there's the shot spotter or other things sometimes people will bring up.
Yeah, so we're conscientious of the limitations of the data we're using, and just to be clear, we haven't employed some sort of new crime mapping software. All we're doing is pulling up our own crime data and analyzing it to sort of direct patrols a little bit more effectively. It does not mean that we'll be abandoning one neighborhood in order to conduct enforcement in another. It just has to do with how we deploy some of the resources. For example, if we have an area where over this 6-year timeline that we've been tracking calls in our current CAD RMS system shows that we have a much more significant level of complaint of illegal fireworks, we may choose to put a bicycle unit concentrated down there as opposed to moving it to another side of town where the complaints are lower or where the citations that have resulted are lower. So certainly I'm sensitive to the comment, which is, suggests that if we're enforcing in one area more than in others, then it looks like it needs more enforcement in that area, and that can create some sort of bias in how we deploy our resources. But I think this is very, very specific to fireworks complaints as opposed to overall arrests or patrolling resources. So I think that the use of data is appropriate.
Okay, thank you again to both. And as Vice Mayor said, we know it's extra time and effort, but we appreciate you folks doing that for the community. Please pass it on to your teams. Let's move on to consent calendar. All items are considered routine or implemented in an earlier council action. Actions may be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion unless requested. So let's go to the first item of, for example, I have just want to ask a question on item F, but I don't need to have it pulled for a separate vote. Is there anyone that needs something pulled for a separate vote? Linda?
I think we should pull D for a separate vote.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Is there anyone else for a separate vote? Seeing no one else, Councilmember Medina?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to have a comment or a brief discussion on item E and item G.
E and G. Okay.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I thought we were just pulling items. I just have a comment on E and F.
No, this is good. So E and F, so we already have that. So E and F will have comments, as well as G and D will be pulled for a separate action item. So let's just go to those with comments. Let's go to item E first, which is adopt a resolution authorizing the application for and receipt of state California local early action planning grants programs in the amount of $150,000. Councilmember Medina and Councilmember Mason. Marty, if you go first.
Sure. I just wanted to pull this so that, or have a brief discussion on this so that we do acknowledge that during these financial difficulties that we have staff that are pursuing grants, and just shedding a little bit of light on those efforts. And if staff can perhaps just a really short discussion or statement on that item. Thank you.
Thank you. And why don't we go to Councilmember Mason? So when they're doing that, if there's any additional questions, they're all done at once. Councilmember Mason.
Yeah, I actually am echoing Councilmember Medina's comment, and I know at one of the previous council meetings, I think it was Director Tan that said, we actually do apply to grants, and we've all, as council members, really encouraged staff to tell that story. So I'm really happy to see this on the agenda, and thank you to the staff that's working on this. That's it.
Thank you. Any staff, city manager, who would you like to direct it to? I'm sorry. Councilmember David. Hold on, city manager. Councilmember Davis, you raised your hand.
Yeah, just on that same point, I think we had talked about it at one point of the staff keeping record of all the grants we applied for, and we didn't ask for them to go backwards, but to actually start keeping record of it going forward. So is there a plan for that? And you can go with yours.
Thank you so we can get all done at once. Thank you. City manager.
Hi. Thank you. Javon Grogan. Yes, there is a plan for tracking grants, and we are doing that. And I will bring Pamela Wu into the room. So Melissa, if you will do that, and we will have her respond to the council members' questions, since she did a lot of the work on acquiring the grant. And Pamela Wu is our housing manager within the Community and Economic Development Department. Planning and housing manager.
Good evening, Ms. Wu.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. If I can provide a short background on the LEAP grant. This is an over-the-counter, non-competitive awarding an amount of about $150,000 from the state, encouraging city to complete the next housing element and also to do necessary planning work to streamline housing activity. If you remember last year, we brought you forward another grant application, the SB2 grant application, which the city was very lucky to be awarded for the amount of $160,000. So this will augment the funding that we have already received in a total amount of about $310,000.
Thank you. Did that answer a colleague's questions? Okay. If so, let's move on to item F, adopt resolution approving fiscal year 2021 City Council priority focus areas and related strategic initiatives. The only thing that I was bringing up is when I read through the document, I saw one item that we had, and that was, it brought up traffic calming. And if you remember, my memory goes that we went about traffic calming, speed bumps, paving, and it went back and forth a little bit. And so we came up with my memory is a inclusive overview of the traffic calming process and how it's initiated, how it's done, how it's brought forward to the TSBC, et cetera. But listed in the document, it says speed bumps, repaving, which repaving to me doesn't have relevancy to traffic calming, though everybody would say, if you pave it, maybe, it'll be better. So I just want to review that to say, my understanding was it was traffic calming and it was more of a global perspective on that. So I'm suggesting that be stated for that, and that the speed bumps, because that has to do with traffic calming, and the repaving, which doesn't have anything to do with traffic calming, that be eliminated when the resolution is passed, and just have the overview of the traffic calming measures. Councilmember Medina.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with you. That's how I understood it. So that little revision there would be appropriate. But I also wanted to thank all of the staff for the amount of work that went into this. We've come a long way from in the last couple of years with getting to this point. And although we do have this list, at some point we still need to touch back on it and set which of those that we really want to get done first, second, third, fourth, fifth, because it's still too many to try to get done in a year. So I just wanted to share that with everyone, and I'm looking forward to when we'll touch base on this. And I think it's just a great way that we're continuing trying to get input from our council on things that they feel that they could contribute to.
Thank you. Councilmember Mason, is your hand up for this item or? Okay. Go ahead, please. You're muted.
Okay, thank you. So I agree with what Mayor Medina said as well. That was my understanding. I just wanted to ask around the strong governance. My understanding on the strong governance was it was going to look at our governance overall. So our council processes, policies, our commissions, our committee structures, and then we also talked about like training maybe twice a year. So I just wanted to just say it wasn't limited to just committees, but how can we strengthen at every level each of our governing boards? And I also just wanted to say that I know this takes a lot of time, and I really hope that as the city builds up its senior team, I know there's been a lot of transitions. I really do hope that some of these are day-to-day operations, and in the future don't come to the council, and we can really focus on policy and ordinances. Because I really think that as we operate and function at a higher level, that this is work hopefully staff will need to do in the future for us. We can focus on broader policy issues. And that also falls under just strengthening our governance structure. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing nobody else, we're going to move on to G. Adopt a resolution terminating the local emergency declared on December 3rd, 2019. And that's the Crestmore Canyon slope. That was the stability project. That's up at the top of San Bruno Avenue near Glenview. And so Councilmember Medina and then Councilmember Mason.
Right. It's great that this project is done. We were getting updates at our council meetings about how progress is, and I thought this would be an opportunity to acknowledge that it's done. That canyon face there is in a much safer condition, and it's an example of how something that costs that much money could be not in our budget, and it's likely something similar. Every year there's something, either the lights go out in one part of the neighborhood, a box culvert blows out on another part of our city, and it's just something to be aware of and acknowledge that the emergency is over, the work is completed, and thanks to our staff for taking care of that.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, Linda, you're right. Yeah, you didn't wish to speak on that one. Thank you for reminding me. And yes, it is thanks to staff for their quick effort, expediting and stabilizing, as well as putting up a guardrail, which I think people are happy to see, so that you just don't have that huge drop off the side of the sidewalk. Okay, so those are the items that we wanted to have comments on. That would take care of everything under consent with the exception of D. Do I have any action from council to accept all items with the exception of D with the modification to the traffic calming?
I move that we...
Through the chair.
Consent.
I was just going to say, through the exception of the traffic speed bump and also the strong governance, because I think, Linda, you wanted committee removed?
No, she wanted to make sure it was inclusive of all those.
Yeah. So however you want to word that.
Okay. So noted. Vice Mayor?
So just if I could get a confirmation from staff then that they understand the modifications that those two items will take, and then I'll make the motion to approve the remainder of the consent.
City Attorney, City Manager, is that clear on our motion, or
Yep.
what we're our discussion to a motion?
Yes, totally clear, with one caveat. The conversation that the council had with regard to strong governance really centered around committees. But we understand the concept that Councilmember Mason is articulating, and with your affirmative vote, we will draft up a strategic initiative that is encompassing all the aspects that were discussed, and we will be sure to provide that to council, and if any amendments are needed, we can handle that at a later date.
Okay. Vice Mayor.
All right, in that case, I will make a motion to approve the remainder of the consent, everything except item D.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Vice Mayor and Councilmember Davis. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We're going to go now to the item that was pulled, item D, adopt resolution approving the San Bruno Community Foundation 2021 budget. Councilmember Mason.
Hi. So I really appreciate, I want to start by saying I appreciate all the work that's being done around the Community Foundation and for the community. I think this is a really unique opportunity that our city has that a lot of other cities don't have. And I preface it with that because I know that this is delicate, but I want to ask that in future reports, including the annual report, I've reviewed a few of them, that we start receiving as part of the budget process some metrics. I know that this is being worked on already based on a conversation that I had with Leslie. But I think it's important that when we're giving amounts of $300,000 and more, that we confirm that those are being received by the community, that they're made for. And I know that within the structure right now of the Community Foundation, they do receive reports and they're very responsible about them. But I'd love those to be shared with us as well. The second request that I'd like to make tonight is that when I look at the budget report and I see one page of $70 million that we're approving tonight, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, especially given the deficit that the city's in, the repercussions that are going to be felt by many people within the city. But just on a regular basis, $70 million is a lot of money. And so I'd request that similar to the city council's budget approval, that we have combined or joint study sessions, at least 2 prior to the budget approval, where we actually have a discussion, we can ask questions around the budget. I think it would provide for some better understanding, not just for the council, but for the public, who often questions where this money has gone and where it's going. And in reading the bylaws, the budget approval is one of the responsibilities of the city council. And so if I had support or I'm not really sure what the process would be for that, but I think some study sessions would be really fruitful for the community, because so far it appears from what I've read that the foundation is doing what they were intended to do, and they're doing a great job. And I think this is part of the story that we need to make sure the public is aware of. But also, as being the accountability for the Community Foundation, we also need to ensure that we are aware of what we're voting to approve. And that's it. Those are the 2 areas I wanted to comment on tonight. Thank you.
Staff have any comments or colleagues? Or maybe I should ask staff and or the foundation director, but Javon?
Understand the request. I think we can handle that through another avenue, but should the full city council be in favor of that, we can absolutely build that into the budget process next year.
And this is for next year, to be clear.
Okay, let's have any discussion. Councilmember Medina.
Yes. I support having an opportunity to have a more in-depth examination of the budget. So I don't know if we would need 2, or I don't know if one option would be to have a subcommittee to sit in on a couple other meetings, but I think that it would be beneficial to have some overlapping of discussion on the budget.
Vice Mayor Salazar.
Thank you. So I'm thinking back to the very early days of when we formed the foundation, and there was lively debate around what the city council's role would be in managing the foundation. And I very strongly advocated for having the council keep as much as possible their fingers out of that organization's affairs, primarily because the concern was that the city would somehow monopolize the funds that were in there when they were intended to be a direct benefit to the public. And so the vision that I think we ultimately went with was an organization that was directly responsible to the public. They would respond to the public's needs. And I think they've done an excellent job at meeting that condition. The listening campaigns that were done around the rec center, they have to follow open meeting rules just like we do. They have a separate finance advisory committee that meets also in public. And so there is a lot of public process that takes place in the development of their policies, of their decisions, and I'm very much aware of where a lot of the money is going. I track, what they're doing with the scholarships. The first year that the scholarships were done, I participated in the selection committee, so I've had firsthand knowledge of how that works. I worked with the Cappuccino Alumni Association, so I know how the grant process works and how those funds have to be reported back. They have reporting requirements. I do agree with Councilmember Mason on the reporting aspect, where if information is coming in, it would be nice to make that a little bit more public, because I don't think any of that information is shared. We do see the Foundation's annual report, but there's a lot of input that goes in. The reporting that they require is not necessarily as visible. So I would support that piece. But just in terms of involving the council in their decision-making process, I don't feel that it's necessary. I think it would interfere with their independence, and so I would not support that part of it.
And I'm also, City Clerk's told me, we're going to go to Councilmember Davis, and there's a member of the community.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I probably echo Michael's comments as well. Any council member can attend any one of those public meetings. We can participate in that. I do agree that we've elected this board to really do that job. So I'm not, there's part of me that says the average member of this community has no idea what's going on with that, but that's by their choice. I do feel, and I've made this comment to our city manager a few times, that we can really publicize the foundation, their meetings. Our staff has done a great job on getting out communication. Maybe Javon, in one of your newsletters, so we can talk about it. But I would really love to see a video that we can post. It could be available on our city website. It could be available on their page. It really talks about the foundation, talks about what they've done, talks about and has readily available the documents and the data that the residents need to see. Those are my.
Okay, Melissa, can we bring in the member of the public, please?
Yes, Mr. Goldberg, your hand was up, but I see it's now down. If you want to speak, will you please raise your hand to indicate that was correct? Okay, I don't see the hand raised.
Okay. Councilmember Mason, you have your hand up again, and then Rico's going to talk.
Yeah, at this time, I'm not, I want to be clear, I don't think I had said, and I'm not advocating for the council making the decision on the budget, but I think adding it to a consent calendar is really not enough to approve a budget of $70 million. And that's, so a study session would allow us to ask any questions that we have on the one-page document of, representing $70 million. And so I just want to be clear that that's really more of the intention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I mean, that could be something where it's a conduct of business on the regular scheduled agenda, which is more opportunity if the concern is having community folks participate or watch or listen when we have a study session. As you know, the attendance and participation level is not significant. For me personally, I was kind of a little bit on the other side of what the vice mayor said back when it was formed about having more council involvement. But they are a 501c3. I know sometimes council members of past or whatever might say, well, let's allocate here or here. We're fortunate when that community foundation goes out and says, and they're noted for saying what they're going to do and doing what they say, and getting sponsorships for Community Day, getting other grants or other funds. It's because they're their own entity. They don't have the interest. They don't have the political motivation by us stepping in. So in hindsight, looking at it, I think us not being engaged in their budget or how they will spend the money, because ultimately it does come to us, and that's how it was established. So I could see it coming back, like Councilmember Mason said, where it is under a conduct of business, that gives it more highlight, that gives it more discussion, that gives it more opportunity. So for that, I could see that. And then Councilmember Mason already said, as far as metrics, those are already being worked on. So, okay, is there anything else on this topic? Okay, so we have item D under consent still to approve. Is there a motion?
If there's no further discussion, motion to approve it?
Davis,
I'll second Laura's motion.
One of you two.
I would say I'll second that. I know, okay, that's fine.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Mason.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar.
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. Thank you,
Motion
everyone. All right, City Clerk, public hearing.
Item 6A, hold a public hearing and adopt resolutions approving fiscal year 2020-21 operating and fiscal year 2021-25 capital improvement program budget, approving city appropriations GAN limit for fiscal year 2020-21, approving the city's master fee schedule for fiscal year 2020-21.
We're going to turn it over to the city manager, and I'm almost certain that the finance director will follow. Oh, I see the finance director. My apologies. But maybe you're going to give him an introduction, proper introduction.
Sure, I'll give him a proper introduction. So our presentation will be led by Keith DeMartini, our finance director. We've had 4 meetings with the city council directly on the budget, very long study sessions. We've gone over 350 slides, reviewing information with robust question and answers. And I think the city council has heard from me enough. And so we're going to have Keith give the presentation tonight, which is a brief overview of our proposed budget for 2021. And then staff is here to answer any questions, myself, Keith, as well as our department directors. So with that, Keith DeMartini.
Thank you very much, Javon. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Keith DeMartini, your Finance Director, and it's my pleasure to present the final presentation of the proposed operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2021. So the objective of tonight's meeting is to hold a public hearing requesting City Council's approval of the fiscal year 2020-21 operating and capital improvement budget, as well as approving the city's appropriation or GAN limit for fiscal year 2021 as well. The agenda for this evening is to provide just a high-level brief overview of much of the content that staff has already provided over the prior budget retreat and budget study sessions that have already been held over the past month, including the general fund, a few enhancement requests that are included, the city's reserves, an overview of the city's enterprise and internal service funds, our capital improvement program, the Measure G district sales tax revenues and allocations, one vehicle request in the proposed budget, the master fee schedule, the GAN limit, alternatives that the City Council may consider this evening, and then finally our request to the City Council, and then of course questions and answers. So let me start by just providing a brief overview of the sessions that have already been held. We had a kickoff the later part of May, which was followed by an all-day retreat presenting an overview of the budget and going through each departmental budget. That was then followed in the middle part of June with another all-day retreat reviewing the enterprise and the internal service funds, as well as the capital improvement program. Staff met with the Citizens Revenue Measure Oversight Committee last Monday on June 15th to present the Measure G allocations to that committee. And then finally, here we are this evening, where staff will be requesting the City Council's adoption of the proposed budget. High-level overview, the city's proposed budget is about $180 million when you look at all of our funds. The general fund, which is the largest fund for the city, is just under $50 million. There are 265 full-time equivalent positions and over 100 capital improvement projects in the larger capital improvement program. The city's fiscal condition is challenging this year, most notably due to the impact related to COVID and the shelter-in-place orders that are in effect, and the significant reduction of economic activity around the area, which has directly resulted in reduced revenues for the city's current fiscal year situation, as well as being projected into next fiscal year. This slide just summarizes some of the most significant challenges in the city's financials that are in the 2021 budget. Including in the general fund, with much of our general taxing revenues declining and our departmental revenues declining in the budget year. Our stormwater enterprise fund has its challenges with inadequate ongoing revenue to sustain not only the annual operating expenses that are required to maintain the stormwater system, but not enough revenue to work on any capital improvements. The city also has its challenges with ensuring adequate funding for vehicles and equipment and technology replacements in our equipment reserve fund. Our city self-insurance fund is also has its challenges with not having adequate reserves on hand in case of an event of a large insurance claim that might be filed with the city. The city is also underfunded with its facilities and building reserve fund as well, with really inadequate resources to not only maintain the city facilities, but also enhance them for ongoing needs of the community. The city net services department has also had its challenges over the year, and so we have talked at length about the ongoing and increasing negative fund balance in that fund, and the impact and the pressure that has on the city's general fund to really have adequate reserves in times like this. So we'll provide an overview of that this evening. And then also, kind of skipping down a little bit to the bottom, Measure G was a district sales tax measure that the voters adopted back in November of 2019 that took effect this fiscal year. And that fund that new additional sales tax revenue source will prove to be a vital component of hopefully balancing the budget this upcoming fiscal year, as well as implementing a number of enhancements in the coming years as well. So just a high level, in developing the budget for the upcoming 2021 year, staff was looking at approximately $8.2 million deficit, resulting from both the reduction of general tax revenues and departmental revenues, as well as ongoing increased expenses for personnel and other contractual obligations. On the revenue side, the impacts primarily stemmed from COVID-19 and the sort of the recession and economic downturn from that. Our transient occupancy tax, or more commonly known as our hotel tax, was projected to decline approximately 40% year over year. We're also projecting a substantial decline in sales tax revenue from reduced sales activities, including our Measure G district sales tax as well. And then you can see in our recreation programs and our senior center programs a significant amount of declining activity as well. On the expenditure side, staff was projecting an increase of approximately $4 million from mostly personnel cost increases and additional operating cost increases. Approximately 75% of the general fund budget goes to pay for personnel, so it's the most substantial use of our general fund revenues. The base budget included additional $900,000 of PERS pension cost increases, which we talked about at detail at one of the study sessions, as well as additional health benefit costs and minor increases to various supplies and contract categories as well. Overall, the proposed budget that was discussed with the City Council included a number of budget balancing strategies that staff is proposing to be implemented to balance the budget in fiscal year 2021. And this slide here lists those budget balancing strategies that staff articulated in the proposed budget, as well as walked through in a great level of detail with the City Council over the past month. This budget balancing plan includes a number of items, from defunding or reducing scope or identifying alternative funding sources for a number of projects in our capital improvement program. It also includes the delaying filling, holding vacant 13 positions in the upcoming fiscal year. And the staff has an update in regards to the number of vacant positions to be identified, which I'll provide in a few slides. Staff has also identified a number of operating expense reductions, as well as delaying the ongoing allocation of funds into our equipment reserve fund. Staff has also proposed to leverage funds in our general fund reserve, as well as other funds, to transfer into the general fund to help balance. Staff has also identified and proposed $2 million from the Measure G district sales tax fund in order to balance the general fund as well. And then finally, staff also identified $1.7 million of personnel cost reductions from various measures, again, subject to the collective bargaining process, all of which were folded into the proposed budget to help with balancing. Since the date of this report, the staff is still in negotiations with the employee bargaining unions regarding that $1.7 million personnel reduction line item. Since the budget was first presented to the council, staff has identified 5 additional positions proposed to be held vacant during the year in order to achieve approximately $729,000 of additional savings. And those positions are listed here on this slide. That leaves approximately $1 million remaining of additional savings to be identified. Excuse me. If the City Council adopts the resolution this evening for the budget, staff will adjust the departmental budgets to reflect these additional vacancies accordingly. As such, the adopted budget will be balanced. The city will continue to partner with the labor unions to identify those additional specific reductions in order to avoid any further personnel reductions. In the event that an agreement is not reached, staff will return to the City Council at a later time with specific reductions in order to implement the required budgetary savings so that we have a balanced budget at the end of the day. This slide here shows a very high-level summary of the beginning fund balance, the revenues and expenditures, and what the ending fund balance is projected to be in the general fund. And as you can see here, the ending fund balance in fiscal year 2021 is projected to decline to under the reserve policy target of $1.5 million to $1 million. Again, much of that due to the slides that I presented earlier with the reduced revenues coming in and the continued pressure on our expenditures. The majority of the general fund revenues come from the taxes, our property tax, business license tax, sales tax, and TOT. And the majority of the city's general fund revenues go to pay for the public safety function of police and fire at just about 56% of total operating expenses, as you can see on this pie chart here. This next slide shows a high-level summary of the major components of the city's general fund revenues, a majority of which are coming from taxes. As you can see, taxes are projected to be down about 11% year over year, and you can see that a majority of the other sources in our general fund are also projected to decline year over year. The line on this table called allocation and other revenues is projected to increase And what's included in that $10.3 million number in the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget are all of the transfers in to the general fund from the other funds, including the Measure G district sales tax fund. Those transfer ins are recorded here on this line for your reference. This next slide shows where those general fund dollars are spent by department. You see primarily the general fund dollars are spent on police and fire, as I indicated earlier. In the proposed budget, it does include a very small number of enhancement requests. Again, the cost of these enhancement requests are included in the proposed budget, and so it's fully encompassing the cost of that, so you can really understand the impact on the budget. And these enhancements include additional wellness screening with the fire department staff. It includes an intern in the planning department to work on housing initiatives. It includes an allocation of funds for the city to work on the housing element update. It also includes additional money to reclassify an existing position in the Parks Department to a Parks Service Manager. And there's been an update on that, which I'll get to in a few slides. There's also an item to install library computer cabling in the library as well. Also in central garage and in building facilities, there is a request to reclassify a position so that there is a facilities and garage services manager position in central garage and building facilities. And then finally, there's a small request for Microsoft Office 365 city licensing to implement a more robust Microsoft product citywide. Again, all of the cost of all of these enhancement requests have been included and folded into the proposed budget. This slide here shows what the ending fund balance in the city's general fund reserves are projected to be. Again, staff presented this in a great level of detail in the study sessions. The main takeaway on this slide is that staff are projecting that all of our general fund reserves are projected to decline into the fiscal year 2021 budget, being that part of the budget balancing strategies are to actually dip into and use some of these reserves, particularly the general fund reserve, that second line right there, projected to decline by about $600,000 year over year. So at the end, when you add up the total amount of the city's general fund reserves, including all of those reserves on the prior slide, it adds up to about $19.9 million. And as the staff have discussed in prior study sessions, the amount of available cash on reserves is actually hindered by the substantial negative fund balance in the City Net Services Enterprise Fund. That fund is projected to have an ending fund balance of over $13.6 million by the end of next fiscal year. So that really reduces the available cash that the city has on hand in the event of an emergency or the event that the city needs to have that cash available very quickly. And then if you were to consider the available cash that we have in our equipment reserve of about $3.4 million, our total reserves that we have available in cash is just under $10 million. And that represents less than 25% of our annual operating expenditures, which is the target that is articulated in the city's reserve policy. So at the request of the city manager earlier this afternoon, staff was able to research the budgets of a number of peer cities in San Mateo County to try and articulate this point a little bit further. This graph right here shows these cities' reserves as a percent of their total general fund expenditures. Most of these are included in their either proposed or recently adopted fiscal year 2021 budget. And San Bruno's bar line is on the bottom, and what this shows is that San Bruno's total reserve percent compared to our expenditures is about 19%, which is less than San Mateo, Burlingame, and South San Francisco, and it's on the lower end, similar to Redwood City and Daly City. It's also important to note that when comparing San Bruno's total reserves to these other cities, just the pure dollar amount of reserves that we have on hand, San Bruno's is the lowest. It's the lowest by more than $2 million, with the next closest city being Daly City of having just a little over $2 million more than San Bruno. When you look at our reserves, comparing it against the city's populations, a per capita comparison, San Bruno also rates towards the bottom of this, with only Daly City coming in lower than San Bruno. All of these other cities have a higher per capita reserve amount compared to San Bruno. Again, this just is additional information and context as it relates to the limited reserves that the city truly has in order to be used for any additional budget balancing strategies in the proposed budget. This slide right here is a summary of the 4 enterprise funds on the city: water, wastewater, stormwater, and city net services. And it shows what the revenues and expenditures are projected to be, what the surplus or deficit is, and the ending fund balance. And as we've talked about in prior sessions, the water and the wastewater funds are fiscally healthy, primarily due to the rate increases that the City Council adopted in prior years. And those funds will be used on the very robust capital improvement program for both of those enterprises over the coming years. The Stormwater Fund has its challenges. It's projected to run a deficit of just under $500,000 and is projected to unfortunately have a negative fund balance starting in fiscal year 21-22. And so staff will be working on identifying additional dedicated revenue for that enterprise in the coming months. And then also City Net Services. That enterprise has turned a corner with being able to renegotiate a number of its longstanding contracts and identify cost savings, which will help in the upcoming fiscal year. But there remains a very large negative fund balance in that fund, which again hinders the ability of the city to have cash available in our reserves. This slide here summarizes the city's 4 internal service funds. All of these funds in the proposed budget are projected to meet the minimum reserve target of having 15% in the fund in the event that they need to leverage those funds for specific, more immediate needs. And the city is proposing to increase the ending fund balance in the self-insurance fund gradually over time so that we have more funds available in the event of a large insurance claim. This slide right here summarizes the over 100 capital improvement projects in our CIP, from water to wastewater to stormwater, all the way down to streets and technology. And what it shows is that over $60 million of funds have already been appropriated for many of these projects and will be carried forward into 2021 with very minimal strategic funding requests being requested in fiscal year 2021. And over the 5-year program, there is over $206 million of funding being planned to implement these very important capital improvement projects. The table on this slide summarizes the appropriation requests using the Measure G district sales tax revenue. As I said earlier, the Citizens Revenue Measure Oversight Committee met for the first time last Monday, and staff presented an overview of the proposed budget to the committee, as well as this slide with the proposed allocations of that fund. The committee unanimously approved of the proposed Measure G allocations in the 2021 budget, with the exception of requesting an alternative funding source for the Parks Manager Enhancement Request position. And so they took an action to approve of reducing the overall allocation down to $2,555,000, removing that item. Staff is in concurrence with the committee's feedback and recommends to the City Council that that Parks Manager Enhancement Request be funded through an allocation of the general fund balance, which would reduce the general fund balance to just below $1 million. This slide right here just summarizes the one vehicle request in the Water Enterprise Fund that is being requested in the proposed budget for $65,000. There are no other large equipment or vehicle requests being made in the proposed budget. In the staff report, there is a website link to the city's master fee schedule. The city council does receive sort of an update on the master fees annually during the budget process. There are no updates to the fee schedule during this budget cycle at this time. But as the city council is aware, staff is working on a comprehensive user fee study. And so at the conclusion of the analysis and the work on that study, staff will bring that to city council for its consideration soon. The GAN limit is a voter-approved initiative that limits the amount of tax-generated revenue for a municipality. And the GAN limit is based on an adjusted basis from many years ago due to really based on cost of living and population growth within the area. And the city's adjusted fiscal year 2021 appropriation limit is well below the cap set forth in that law by over 32%. So we are in compliance with that law. The city council does have alternatives to consider when choosing to approve of the budget. You may amend the appropriation amounts contained in the proposed budget this evening at the time of approval. You could also elect to not approve of the proposed budget. That would take effect on July 1st. And in the case that you do choose to do that, you can adopt an alternate resolution which would assure continued municipal operations. And you'll see in your packet this evening attached to the staff report an alternative resolution for this purpose if the city council chooses to go down that direction. This slide right here in closing is an updated budget balancing plan that has been updated on the line for utilizing available fund balance in the general fund and increasing that amount from $500,000 to $544,000 to account for the Measure G Revenue Oversight Committee's recommendation to identify an alternative funding source for that enhancement request for the Parks Manager position. So this table has been updated to account for that. And then finally, just a quick status on the personnel cost reductions. Again, staff originally presented $1.7 million of personnel cost reductions subject to labor negotiations in the proposed budget. Again, since then, 5 additional vacancies have been identified for potential savings, and staff are continuing to work with labor on reviewing additional options for consideration. And staff will return to the city council very soon after the budget is adopted with the specific reductions that have been confirmed in order to achieve the required savings for fiscal year 2021. So staff's request to council is to hold a public hearing and adopt resolutions approving of the fiscal year 2021 operating and capital improvement program budgets, and also approving of the city appropriations limit for fiscal year 2021 as well. And that concludes my presentation this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If you could take down the slide presentation. Thank you. Just for clarification, because it does say on the agenda approving the city's master fee schedule, that is not one of the items that we need to do this evening. That will be coming back to us, so there is no change at this moment nor action being requested. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. So at this time, this is a public hearing, so we're going to go ahead and open it up to the public with council's approval in case anybody needs to do something else after they have their comment or want to stay with us. They're welcome to. Do we have any members of the public, City Clerk?
Yes, we have one. Anna Maria. One moment while I bring you in the room. Anna Maria, I'm trying to unmute you. I'm not able to get Anna Maria unmuted. And we don't have any other hands up.
Okay, if something changes, if you would let us know. So I'm going to let you, City Clerk, work on that just for a little bit. I'm not going to ask for a motion to close public hearing at this time in case we get connected with the member of the public. And then, City Clerk, if that does happen, could you please let me know so that we can let the public member be heard and then close public hearing officially?
Yes.
With that, thank you. With that said, let's move it to council for questions and comments. Not seeing any at this moment.
To the chair.
Councilmember.
I would just say that we have been meeting for many hours. Council has had numerous study sessions on the budget. We've looked at many different things, and this has been, for me, an experience I've never experienced before. You know, I can remember going through a company meeting back in January about this pandemic that was coming. And I knew then, when I looked in the eyes of a former fire chief who said, this is real, this is serious, that I know he wasn't joking. And I just, you know, here we are in June, and I just can't believe what it's done to our community, what it's done to our city. And so this is a very difficult budget to review. I just want to commend staff. Keith, you've done an excellent job. Javon, an excellent job in presenting to us many different options and trying to figure out the best way to balance our budget. City of San Bruno has struggled for many years. We've never been fat. You know, it's never been a city where you can say, great, we've got a lot of extra money, let's hire that position that's been pending for a number of years. One of the positions we've always wanted to hire was someone who's a public information officer so that we can ensure that we get better communication out to the residents. But it's a position that hasn't been filled over time because of budget, and it's always the one position that gets put behind. We need to look at only essential services. And, you know, that saddens me when I have to look at wanting to include all essential services, because I think that the library or the recreation program or all the police officers that we can have on the streets, that those have to be cut. And so this is a extremely challenging time, and I just want to commend staff for doing a great job on this.
Okay, I'm going to go to Vice Mayor Salazar, then I'm going to ask for the close of the public hearing. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo Councilmember Davis's comments and thanking staff. I know this has been a very difficult budget to get through, and you know, we've seen some amazing things coming up, you know, up until this point. And last year, we were able to whittle away and save and cut and actually come up with a budget that was balanced, and we were really making some strides to getting our arms around this thing. And then we had a couple of businesses fail on us, and then we had COVID-19, and so this is where we are now. And I know this budget has been particularly difficult for staff, and so I just wanted to thank you, commend you on the work that you've done to get us to this point. You know, the structural deficit that we've seen for so long, it doesn't even make sense to look at that now. You know, I'm looking at the $500,000 that we're taking out of the fund balance, which in normal times that would have been a huge red flag for me, and I would have been thinking about, okay, so what else can we do? But we're holding positions open. We're taking from reserves. We're using fund balance and all of this to just keep the lights on and keep us moving forward. I know it's difficult. We've already robbed Peter to pay Paul, and probably robbed Paul to pay Peter again. And I just don't know where we could cut anymore. I know it's not a great situation to be in, but you know, I am hopeful that we're going to get through this quickly. I see that staff does have a very solid understanding of the operations and where our priorities should be. So I am confident that this budget that we have in front of us, while it's definitely not ideal, is a solid one, and I think the plan is solid, and definitely support moving forward on this. Thank you.
All right, before we move on to other council members, there is no member of the public at this time or others that have raised their hand. I've been notified. So can I please have a motion and a second to close public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
City Attorney, do we actually need a roll call for closing the public hearing? Could that be done verbally?
I think for that you can do it verbally.
Thank you. Therefore, by voice vote, all those in favor of closing public hearing, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? I have a 5-0 voice vote to close public hearing. We'll bring it back to City Council. Councilmember Mason.
Hey, so this is my first budget year, and I think it's been tough. We learned prior to COVID that we were looking at an approximate $4 million deficit. I think a lot of this is just really the city not having made some decisions, for years. I think that the good news is I think we're heading in a good direction. I think the development impact fees, the Airbnb, the TOT, we've got a number of things that are moving along. But I'm really sad that we're going to have to wait on Florida Park to really get that moving. And really, I guess frustrated might be the right word around, what's going to happen with our municipal operations, such as the library. With that said, I do understand that this is, there's no money, and I understand that staff has worked really hard to make this budget work, and I know that there's going to be some repercussions on employees, which I think is difficult for anybody, especially the employer. What I wanted to ask about was in particular about Measure G. Thank you, Keith, for pointing out the $44,000 number. And I think for those of you, for the public or from council that did not attend the Measure G committee meeting, I really want to applaud Vaughn Gregory. After 3 members had voted to move forward, Vaughn said she didn't feel comfortable because salaries were not part of the intended use of Measure G. And with her leadership, the rest of the committee did agree that that was not part of the intended use, and that's how that ended up being essentially stricken from the budget. And so with that said, I did want to ask whether the remainder of Measure G or a percentage of it, I believe there was about $470,000 remaining. And I wanted to request that $300,000 of that be used for what was advertised and what was intended, which would have been for street repair. And how would that work? And that question would be directed to Keith, if that's a possibility.
Finance Director DeMartini.
Yes, Councilmember Mason, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
okay,
thank
great.
you.
So yes, Councilmember Mason, it is possible for the City Council to take an action this evening that would appropriate $300,000 of the Measure G district sales tax revenue for street repaving in our existing street resurfacing CIP project. If that action was to be taken, it would reduce the ending fund balance in the Measure G district sales tax fund from $462,000 down to $160,000. Staff's opinion in regards to reducing the fund balance down to that low is that is rather low. Again, it's our first full fiscal year of having the district sales tax revenue being generated in a year where there is so much uncertainty and volatility into that potential source. That ending fund balance so low is rather concerning, but the council is able to take an action for appropriating $300,000 if you choose to do so.
With that said, what would be a recommended number?
I would say that having the ending fund balance in that fund anything lower than $300,000 is likely too low. Okay,
and so there is, I'm sorry. So what was the so if you kept 300,000, we would use how much?
You could propose to use $160,000.
Okay. So then I would propose to use $160,000. I just feel like a portion of that has to go to what was advertised and what was really honestly the number one request from the public in the survey that was sent out. And other than that, I really, what's there to say? We've been at this for hours on end. I know staff has worked on this. It's just really depressing numbers. But I do have to say I appreciate the work that staff has done in the past, in particular 2 years, to really try to start bringing revenue in so that we can turn this around. Because I think that without these new revenue sources that we're getting, we're going to keep digging our hole deeper. So thank you.
Councilmember Davis.
I just want to comment on Councilmember Mason's recommendation, and that is, I think we're in a unique situation this year. And I think even in the interview, for all the candidates we interviewed, there was only one candidate who didn't agree that the funds this year shouldn't be spent on essential services, right? I mean, I got to tell you, if your son is walking home from a friend's house and gets pistol whipped, you care. And I care, because when my niece was almost in that situation, I want to make sure that our residents are safe, and that this year, those funds should go towards essential services to make sure we keep our city safe.
Councilmember Medina.
Yes, thank you. It has been a very difficult budget. I understand and been through hours with the staff, with all our council here, and I do struggle with the Measure G part, but this is an unprecedented time now where we have to choose between having our staff being able to do the work. And if it wasn't for the passing of Measure G, where would we be then? We have, I got to look at the numbers again, excuse me, but we already are talking about 13 vacancies, and potentially, depending on how we can work a deal out with the union to minimize going much further than that. I can tell you from direct experience, being the first laid off employee in San Bruno history, that it's a very impactful decision that we're making. And knowing that I don't think we really have a choice. So I will vote in support of this budget. I think I appreciate Councilmember Mason's attempt to allocate and make sure we get some money in there, because Measure G was supposed to enhance what San Bruno is going to be doing, and we just can't enhance when we have such a big hole in our budget. So we could go ahead, and I wouldn't have a problem with saying put whatever funds over into the paving program. That's not much money, but it's still an acknowledgement of where that money was supposed to go in the advertisements. Legally, it can go anywhere. Yet we are in a very fluid situation as we're waiting to hear back from our bargaining units on what they're going to do and what we need to continue doing as we probably come up and we'll be facing a emergency where we're going to have to spend money in it, and it's happened every year that I've been on the council. So yeah, we could say it's going to go to Measure G, it's going to be in that slot, but we would have to move it around later on And I think with so much uncertainty that that it's just shuffling money around a little bit. But at some point, we need to make sure that the funds that are supposed to enhance the services or the conditions of our city are met. So I'm okay with that. And we need to pass the budget. We don't have the option to continue operating without it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mason, you have your hand up again? Yes? You're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to comment. I think I've been pretty clear that one of the reasons I didn't support Measure G was because I didn't want it to become a slush fund. It was also, no sunset. There are a number of reasons I can go on and on. But I think it's important to also acknowledge the situation that we're in. And, I think Councilmember Davis made a comment about safety and security. And I do read the reports every week. I read them, if not daily. I catch up with them on the weekends. And even with calls for defunding the police, I'm clear that at this point, there has been, I've made a request, and I know others have as well, that we are looking at our use of force policies. We have a chief who's been commendably very vocal and active in committing to provide a report to the council on the policies that we have, what the cases are, and some metrics around it. So with that said, even with all my concerns around Measure G, this is really an unanticipated situation. And for those reasons, I will be supporting this budget tonight. But I also am requesting that the council also support that there is money available. Our finance director has said that it's okay to alleviate some of that budget to go towards what was guaranteed to the public. And really all I'm asking is that the council support what the public voted for and requested, which has already been suggested by the finance director. So thank you.
Okay, I think the finance director was not going to say he suggested it. He gave us an amount because he didn't want to see it go under 300,000, which would be 160. The Measure G committee obviously did not have that opportunity, has not been asked that question. They were on the others. And as you pointed out, Councilmember Mason, as I watched too, the committee reassessed in regards to the 44,000, and Mrs. Gregory brought that up. That's probably why they made her chair. So anyway, so now she's the chair. I do want to say a couple things, and I know that my colleagues and I know I have received various emails in regards to whether it's, I think the word is better, reallocate rather than defund, or about the percentage of public safety budget. So at our last council meeting, there was a member of the public who had made a comment, which is great, about more training, combat, that 8 weeks they're in the police academy and they're on the street with a gun. And I want to clarify that, to my knowledge, that is not accurate. Not in this city, nor in any city, that the police academy, to my knowledge, is 6 months, 5 days a week, about 10 hours a day. That they also have their 4 month with the field training officer, which means that person is watching them in the car every moment. And then they're on probation for 18 months. So I just wanted to clear that so that nobody walked away with that expectation that that's what it takes to be a San Bruno officer. They are trained. I also wanted to look into, because percentages were brought up, and in South San Francisco, their public safety between police and fire are 55% is what they have. They have about 67,000 population, about 30,000 population in Burlingame, with a percentage of 49% for public safety. And what you also understand is ours is requesting it for the police specifically at 19.3. And you have the city of Burlingame that is about 18 and a half just for police. So when you start to talk about the totality of everything, when we talk about Burlingame, they had calls at 41,662 calls for service. For the city of San Bruno, 49,581 calls for service. And I think it's important, and I'm only saying these things because I want people to understand when they also were saying about we're too much in the schools. We have one officer a school resource officer that city taxpayers pay for, that's not supplemented by any schools, or private, public, junior high, high school, etc. We have one officer that serves every school in this community, one. So you don't have somebody who is there sitting at the site day in and day out. We also have been hearing about how we don't, now let me tell you, I'm sure the police chief might say, if that's okay, you want that officer on the street, we won't go to the schools. Personally, I think they're needed. He's not saying that. I would think that's another resource that he would have. There's also was comments about we're not having our officers doing the right thing and we're not having the professionals maintain those services. Looking into it, I can tell you that we have CORA for domestic violence counseling and response. We have Life Moves for the homeless population to make sure they're getting the necessary needs, or at least offering those services. First Chance to provide counseling for substance abuse and treatment. We have the Conflict Resolution Center that is also used. There's also SMART, which is a trained AMR paramedic unit that responds to mental health calls. Now that's at a county level, a lot of these, but in SMART, I would encourage our County Board of Supervisors to increase that, since it's only during Monday through Friday during the business day. So this department, as other communities, work with the appropriate individuals that are trained in this. But on the SMART that I just talked about, they will not respond. They will not, their people will not allow them to go to a response without a police officer next to their side. So I think it was just important to mention a few of those things. And as far as salaries for the police department, salaries alone, it is going down. It was this weekend, 682,000, but with what has been readjusted, it may even be closer to $1 million. So I think the department is always been, Marty's worked for the city. I was here when we've had difficult times in 01, 08 as an employee, 08, 09 as a council member. And we have never been, other than a lean city that tries to provide excellent service to its residents. And so I want to make it clear with the police, because though I can empathize with people's concern, I think some of it is not well based when you start to look into it. Personally, just on the police, because they seem to be getting all the attention as far as a lot of my emails, aside from fireworks, that they are doing a good job. They have stepped up to the plate. When we've needed them, in incidences that we've had in this community, we have seen those individuals who step into action, step into danger and in harm's way to provide the service to this community and its residents when called upon. So that's it for me. Is there any other comments from council? Councilmember Davis.
I just want to say and clarify that, I mean, we're talking about a budget this year. I agree, Lynn, Councilmember Mason, that next year, this Measure G, and I think we as a council have been agreed to it, we want to put it towards what we said we would. And we all know that we hear from all the residents in the community about how bad the streets are, how bad the sidewalks are. There's not a street I can walk down that doesn't need some work on it. So I agree with what you're saying. I just have a hard time this year. It's just so bad. When will hotel tax turn around? I hope soon.
Vice Mayor Salazar.
Yeah, I also wanted to follow up on Councilmember Mason's comments, because I agree that we absolutely need to be faithful to that commitment that we made to use the funds in a particular way. And I'm a big advocate of getting our streets paved, and that's why I was a big proponent of Measure G, because I do want to see that money go where it's supposed to. I want to see the potholes fixed, and I want to see streets repaved. But getting back to the finance director's response in terms of what could safely be used, and especially after seeing what's happening to our reserves just across the board, they're being decimated. I guess if we hadn't already touched reserves, it would be a slightly different situation. But I'm wondering, what is the probability that we may still need to dip into this again? And if we don't dip into it, those funds, I imagine, could sit there and eventually be used for the right purpose, even if we don't dedicate them today at this point. And is, more from a planning standpoint, is there some benefit to letting that amount grow and then potentially doing more cost-effective projects, because we can do either more streets in one shot or do some of the streets that are more deserving or more needy with the money if we let it grow a little bit.
Okay, and let's see. Thank you, Vice Mayor. City Manager.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Why don't I try to address this issue brought up by Councilmember Mason. So the request to essentially move $160,000 from what would be fund balance in the Measure G fund is something that can be accommodated. I support the Finance Director's assessment that at a minimum we want to leave about $300,000 in that fund. There may be overage on other road projects and or what Councilmember Salazar mentioned, adjustments once we see what actually comes in throughout the year. So leaving a fund balance makes sense. It's also important to remind the City Council that the process that we had envisioned for Measure G allocations was for staff to make a recommendation, that recommendation to go to the committee, for the committee to opine upon that, and then come back to the City Council for final decision. Should the City Council authorize $160,000 essentially to be moved from the Measure G account to the street paving program, there at this moment is not a project that would utilize those $160,000. And so what we would do is when we have our next Measure G committee meeting, staff will develop a recommendation for where those funds could be allocated. Maybe it's leveraging an existing project where we can do a bid alt to maybe slurry an additional road or some network tagged onto an existing project this year. We will have the Measure G committee opine on that and then bring that to the City Council. So there will be in that process several months before those funds are actually expended. And so that will allow us time to go through that process in keeping with our prior commitment, but also having enough time to have at least the first quarter of sales tax remittances actually received from Measure G before we confirm those expenditures. So should the council desire to do that, we can follow that process.
Okay. Oh, Linda. Go ahead.
It's easier just to do this.
Yes, no problem.
So then we could vote on that tonight, and then it could be with the, preface that it goes to the committee for approval so that it follows its regular process. I just want to confirm that.
Yes. Not approval, but a recommendation that would ultimately be forwarded to the City Council. Okay. And so the City Council's final decision on that will come later. If the council chooses to make that decision tonight, essentially you're moving it from one bucket to the next, but the final confirmation of expending those funds will not come until later.
Are you saying, City Manager, that would need to be a part of the motion?
No, it doesn't have to be.
Or it's a separate recommendation aside from the resolutions, correct?
Right. It does not have to be a separate motion. But in any event, this amount will come back to the City Council because at $160,000 for any project, that's above the City Manager's expenditure authority. And so the final contract and the actual expenditure has to come back to you anyway. Okay.
Colleagues, I'm being informed the person that had their hand up that was having a mute issue unmute, her hand is back up. I know we closed public hearing. I'm not going to take a vote, but with consensus, I would like just to allow her that opportunity since we were having that technical difficulty. We can get her in, we will.
Yes.
The City Clerk.
Okay. Anna Maria, just one moment. Anna Maria, can you hear us?
Hello. Good evening. Yes, I can. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much for taking this time to listen to me for a moment. And I wasn't really well prepared. And I came in just in time to hear you, Mayor Rico Medina, mention about the police and the several emails that you've received from community members expressing their concerns. And while I do regard that some policemen or women in the force do good jobs, and that's good, but I also want you to recognize there is a concern among residents, right? If you're not just getting emails from me, but other people, then I question what's, how are San Bruno residents really feeling, especially in the marginalized communities that specifically live in Lower San Bruno, in the avenues that are often patrolled and policed, profiled by the San Bruno PD. So I just want to make that clear, and I really respect and honor your time. Appreciate you listening. Like I said, I will continue to stay involved in my city as I have for my whole life, serving the city of San Bruno and the larger San Mateo County as a teacher, as an educator, currently as a farmer. But I worked at the San Bruno Public Library for several years, and I'm a proud San Bruno resident. So look forward to continue working with y'all and listening, and hoping that you also truly listen and are in solidarity with the real life situations that are going on in this community and beyond. So I appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know that you sent us, or you sent myself an email at 7:19 this evening. I haven't had an opportunity to read it yet. I also want to just say, any email that the council, they've allowed me just to at least acknowledge it so everybody knows it's been acknowledged. It's also on the website, as well as if it was any San Bruno resident, I did email them back saying I was more than willing to spend time to have a conversation. And anyone who left their phone number who was a resident, I reached out and called them personally. Also, just for your knowledge too, to the speaker, this city council together came up with a statement of support and condemned, along with the police chief, of what transpired and the commitment going forward. And we all read that, and that has been posted. It also is that the police chief and the city manager and the city council has committed, and they are already have been in the process of reviewing the policies for the department and addressing the questions and concerns that have been raised, not only in this community by some residents, but throughout the state, throughout the country. And that is being worked on, and there is commitments from our chief and from our manager to address that, to look into that, to bring it back to the council as a whole for a study session so the community can be updated and informed. And if that means we need to hold a town meeting, or it could be a Zoom, could be in person, or something else, but those commitments are there. This council stands united, not only against hate, but about moving forward and making things better. So back to the council. Linda, you have your, is that from before?
Yes, no, that's for now.
Okay.
I wanted to thank Anna for her comments as well, and just to know that we are looking into this as my son gives me his toothbrush.
That's a good sign.
My husband taking him away. Thank you. I just wanted to, getting back to business, I wanted to make sure Anna knows that we are receiving emails. We're receiving emails, I think, on both sides of the fence around police defunding, police reimagining. And then we also have a number of emails from individuals who are supportive of police. And just echoing what Mayor Medina said, which is we're taking this all very seriously, and we are waiting on some metrics. I also wanted to just really, because we're going to take a vote soon, really encourage the council to support the additional funding for street repaving. I think it's not a huge amount, but it's a lot for what we have right now. But it's also really, I think, symbolic to show the public that we are taking these funds very seriously. And these are needs, just like any other needs that we have. And if you're a car that's passing a pothole every single day and have gotten flat tires, that's just as important as a number of other items that we're prioritizing this year. So I think it just is more than anything letting the public know that we are considerate and we're aware of the funds and what they're meant to be used for. And then lastly, and I don't think I'll say anything more, is I was just hoping, for the sake of the public, that the city manager could speak a little towards Florida Park. Since we are not likely to fund it, this was brought up on May 26th, but for those who are listening tonight, I know that you're being creative around some other avenues to fund the park, and if you could just maybe give something brief so the public knows that they're not forgotten if they live around Florida Park.
And then, thank you, council member. And then, city manager, here's what I was understanding, so I want to reiterate it. You can clarify that these action items for the GANS initiative, as well as the operating and capital improvements, would go as is, and if there's consensus and recommendation by this council to either, if it's to allocate it tonight, then it would be a part of this. If it is to, as you had made a suggestion of having it go, waiting for the first quarter, which would come back in October report, going to the committee and assessing it then. So that makes it in two different elements, but I just want to make sure I heard it correct. City manager.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. With regard to Councilmember Mason's request about the $160,000 to be allocated to our pavement management project this year, the council has a decision. You can act on that request and actually allocate the money to that project, so from the Measure G fund to that project, or you can provide direction to staff to develop a plan to program an additional $160,000, and we will take that to the committee, and when it comes back to the city council, you can allocate at that time. Or the third is you can take no action on that and approve the budget without that. With regard to Council Members Mason's request to talk about Florida Park, why don't I do that very briefly and remind the public or let those that have not heard know that the proposed budget as a budget balancing strategy does include removing $900,000 from the Florida Avenue Park, which will delay the installation of that park. However, the city as a whole is not backing away from that commitment to both design and build Florida Park. 2 meetings ago, the city council did approve a contract amendment in the amount of $44,000 to complete the final design work. So we will have shovel-ready plans for the beautiful park that has gone through significant community input. We intend to continue to seek grant and other funding to make Florida Park a reality. With the remaining money that is in the Florida Park project, we intend to take down the fence, install grass, and open that area up to the community so it can be used as a open space grass area until a park is developed. And so we are currently developing plans to do that and hope to have that done as soon as possible, but certainly within 2020.
Thank you. Okay, it's back to council. We have, again, we're not approving the city master fee schedule, so we have the two items. What I may suggest is that we take a motion second to adopt the resolution on the city appropriations for the GAN, because I think that's straightforward and there's not the $160,000, so we can get that taken care of. So do I have action on that?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second, roll call, and that is to approving the city appropriations GAN limit for 2020-2021.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Mason.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar.
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. Now we have approving the fiscal year budget 2020-2021 operating and 2021-2025 capital improvement program budget. But the question that's going to come up is the $160,000. Is it part of this from the Measure G, or is that or we approve it as is and it goes back as a second thing, which would be on a recommendation? Hopefully that's not too confusing, but that's how I understood it. Please correct me, attorney, if I'm wrong. Councilmember Medina.
I'm looking at page 363 of the budget of the capital improvement program, and it has a $200,000 allocation for Measure G.
We're gonna thank you, Marty. We're gonna throw that one right to the finance director.
Can you say that page number one more time?
363.
Councilmember Medina, that is a Measure G allocation for the street light pole replacement program, which was one of the items that was proposed to be funded through Measure G allocations. It was on slide 24 of tonight's presentation.
Got that.
Okay. All right, so actions from council in regards to the operating and capital budget.
Motion to approve the budget as is and to have council review once we have actual funds in an account.
Review the 160, are you referencing, or?
Yes, review the 160, yes.
Maybe at the first quarter?
Yes.
Motion made to have the operating and capital budget as written, as submitted by the manager and finance director, and then to have it reviewed as far as October's first quarter, and then to see about 160,000 potential going back to Measure G committee if so desired.
I'll second.
A motion made and seconded. Is everybody clear on the motion, or are we good? Or should I ask more staff to make sure they're clear?
Clear.
Can I get clarity on that? Does that, I guess, clarity as far as what is being approved as this? Because so I'm clear, I think this should be, because there was such a delay in having the Measure G committee. I really do think this should be part of the budget that we're approving tonight.
Okay, so I'm going to clarify, but the motion and the seconder were to have the budget approved as is, not with the 160 included in the allocation under it, but to have it come back after the first quarter assessment from the sales tax and where we sit, and then to see if it needs to go back to the committee for their review. And correct me, motion and seconder, if I'm wrong.
Correct.
Do you want to propose a friendly amendment?
Apologize, folks. Water went down the wrong pipe.
That happens.
Yes, go ahead.
So I was only going to add that, we actually did jump through some hoops to get that committee seated so that we could have them in place and have them render their opinion prior to making allocations. And it almost seems now we're reversing the process and trying to get ahead of their decision by dedicating the money, when it should actually be their purview to review the recommendation and then bring it to us. And it sounds like the city manager was saying that even if we shift buckets right now, it's still going to go back to the committee and then come back to us for a decision. So it doesn't seem like we're really going to lose any time or gain any time by shifting buckets tonight. It's still going to go through that process. So I don't know that we're going to lose a lot of time.
As it should.
Yeah, I think, so I guess this is a question for the city manager. I mean, I said I wasn't going to approve a budget without the Measure G committee, and so I know it was set up immediately after that, those comments were made. So my question is, would this be, whether it waits or not, will this be coming as part of this year's budget? My concern is, are we saying that we're waiting to get more money? I'm just trying to figure out what the process is. Can we approve it tonight pending approval from the Measure G committee?
So in any respect, this will occur in 2020 and not be a part of next year's budget. It will be a part of a amended budget for the 2021 fiscal year. Can you allocate the money to the pavement improvement project without a specific project identified? Yes. Your other question is, can you approve it pending a recommendation or pending action from the Measure G committee? That's no, because the Measure G committee does not allocate or commit the city to projects. Only the city council can do that. They are advisory only. And so right now, the $160,000 is above the city manager's spending authority, so I would not have the ability to commit it on behalf of the city. And so it will come back to the city in any event due to the dollar threshold. And so whether the city council decides to allocate that tonight or wait and allocate it later, there will not be a time loss. It is simply a process change of what bucket you would put it in tonight.
Okay, so I'm going to reiterate that from the motion and the seconder, it is to approve the budget as submitted. That, and to be clear, that means the 160,000 would not be a part of this approval that we're doing on this motion. However, just as the city manager said, it can still be allocated, come back and be amended. And is that clear? And city manager and city attorney, am I correct?
Yes.
I hear nothing that's going to silence is
Correct.
means okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So if that's clear,
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, yes.
I raise my hand all the time to the
I'm
device.
sorry.
I'm trained. Yeah.
My call. I apologize.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I just really want to acknowledge Councilmember Mason's interest, but I think it's really important to try to have a 5-0 vote here. I don't want to. I want to be able to say, okay, we're going to get to that, Councilmember Mason, at a later time, and we will. The money will get allocated there eventually. I just hope that we could just agree on this, that we all take this seriously, and we need to do more repairs on our streets and sidewalks. I'm going to vote for this, but I can give you my word and staff has, I think, done a good job in answering the question that it's going to come back, and we have time to deal with it. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. I think you're correct. It would be nice for 5-0. I think staff has had to work very hard in some difficult and challenging times. And also, Councilmember Mason, that is what folks are looking for. I think even the Measure G committee would say, yeah, that was our hope. That's what we wanted. And, thank God Measure G is here to help the staff and our community to the best it can. So agreed as well. It's not to say it's not coming back. It's not to say the 160, but I'm going to support the budget as well. So thank you. I'm seeing no other hands up. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Mason.
Okay, can you repeat one more time what we're voting? Can Councilmember Davis repeat one more time what's on the table? In regard to the $169,000 funds.
Okay, maybe we should, I want to make sure Councilmember Davis certainly can. I don't know if the city attorney, I just want to make sure that once the vote's done, there's abundance of clarity to it. So do we want the city clerk or city attorney or council member? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Sure. Mr. Mayor, can I attempt to do that?
Yes.
So the motion is to approve the budget as recommended, and in regard to Councilmember Mason's request for an additional $160,000 from the Measure G fund balance, that will be tabled until staff develops a recommendation for that $160,000, takes that to the Measure G committee, and brought back to the City Council.
To the motion maker and seconder, is that accurate to your motion and second?
That's how I understood it.
Yes, and just in my reasoning behind this is just I want to make sure we actually have funds and that this is all proposed what we think is coming in, so why not just wait at that point to spend that money or to put it into that bucket?
Okay, thank you both. Thank you, City Manager.
Mr. Mayor.
Vice Council Member. Who's speaking?
City Manager. Just for ultimate clarity, as proposed in the staff report tonight, because there have been changes from the initial proposed budget on May 22nd. Most notably, the additional positions and the change in the $44,000 for the Parks Manager.
Thank you for the clarification. I'm seeing acknowledgements from both Davis and Salazar that they understand and acknowledge. Linda, does that answer your question? So.
Yeah, I think the part that was not clear was that this would be tabled. So this decision is being made tonight that these funds aren't here yet, but the decision will be tabled once we get the funds. And in the meantime, a plan will be created on how to spend the funds. So I would just ask that the city clerk please make sure that that's noted in the minutes. Thank you.
Or in the motion. And I think what it is that Davis, Councilmember Davis said, is it's unprecedented time. So let's make sure the money's coming in too, because we may find that there's 200,000 left and we want to take 160 still.
Yeah. What I didn't want to support is just saying we're not even going to deal with it tonight. I think we need to.
Anybody said not to deal with it is and what I assessed. So we were at roll call, and City Clerk, you had Davis already acknowledged, or?
Yes, aye.
Okay.
Councilmember Mason?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye. I want to thank all my colleagues, and I think a 5-0 vote is needed in these times. We can be united in a lot of things, and I think this is an important thing, as well as all the effort and work to staff. Thank you. Keith, Finance Director, are we going to see you anymore, or are you done for the summer?
I'm going to take a little vacation, but thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Moving on to conduct of business. City Clerk.
Item 7B, consider adopting a resolution amending the bylaws of the Citizens Revenue Measure Oversight Committee to increase the number of members from 5
City Clerk, I apologize. We're on conduct of business A. Let me.
Sorry. Yes.
You know what? Let me, if you don't mind. Item A, receive presentation on the closeout of the Crestmore neighborhood reconstruction project and adopt the resolutions. Accepting the phase 6 of the street improvement project is completed, authorizing the filing of notice of completion with the San Mateo County Recorder's Office, and authorizing the release of withheld retention in the amount of $168,976, and accepting the final report on the closeout of the overall Crestmore reconstruction project and the Crestmore Trust. And I believe we are turning this over to Harry Burrows, who is waiting. So if you could bring him in, please.
Mr. Mayor,
Trying to bring Harry in 1 moment.
while that occurs, why don't I give a quick introduction? Sure. Javon Grogan, City Manager. So our report will be given by Harry Burrows, the city's project manager for the Crestmore Neighborhood Reconstruction Project. As the community will remember, there was a devastating gas pipeline explosion that occurred on September 9th, 2010, almost 10 years. And we are tonight closing out the last phase of that project, and that is the phase 4 that we will talk about, but the total community restoration was $50,500,000 and change. And Harry will talk about that and the phase out of phase 4. We will also have Jennifer Dianos from the city manager's office to talk about the closeout of the trust that was established for distribution of $50 million from PG&E to fund the reconstruction effort. So without further ado, it seems like the PowerPoint is up and Harry is ready. So Harry, take it.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. As Jovan stated, I'm Harry Burrows. I'm the city's contract project manager for the Crestmore Reconstruction Project. And I have hopefully good news for the City Council tonight as we move to officially close out the Crestmore Reconstruction Project and the Crestmore Irrevocable Trust. The items before you tonight include the acceptance of the last construction project in the neighborhood, the Phase 4 Street Improvement Project, as complete, and authorizing notice of completion to be filed and the release of final retention. Additionally, the council is being asked to accept the resolution, or being asked to adopt a resolution accepting the final report on the closeout of the Crestmore Reconstruction Project and Irrevocable Trust. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going through the history of the project, but I do think it's important that I briefly recap some of the major milestones as shown here. So immediately after the pipeline explosion and fire, the cleanup and reconstruction of the Crestmore Canyon slopes and retaining wall was undertaken during the fall of 2010 and into the spring of 2011. The $50 million irrevocable trust was established in March of 2011 for the reconstruction of the neighborhood. About a year later, the $70 million settlement was reached between the city and PG&E for the ultimate establishment of the San Bruno Community Foundation. And with the exception of the canyon slope and retaining wall repairs that were done in the immediate aftermath of the fire and explosion, the first infrastructure repair project didn't start until early 2012. It should be remembered that the explosion site could not be backfilled for over a year. It sat there fenced off as it was considered a crime scene and remained open until all investigations by the NTSB and others were completed. At that point, we could start the reconstruction efforts in earnest. So from 2012 through 2016, we undertook 5 separate construction projects for the work in the neighborhood. The Earl Glenview Park was completed and opened in late 2019, and the Phase 4 Street Improvement Project, the final project, it was actually started in late 2016 and is here before you tonight for acceptance and closeout. So a quick visual recap of the previous phases of the neighborhood reconstruction is shown here. I'm not going to describe each one, but the earlier phases consisted of mostly the replacement of all of the underground infrastructure, the water lines, sewer lines, storm drain lines, and the Phase 4 project reconstructed all of the surface above ground improvements. So to put the overall project into perspective, here's a listing of all of the now completed 9 reconstruction contracts that were performed along with their corresponding construction costs. These are the actual construction contract amounts with the contractors, not the total project costs. So the Phase 4 Street Improvement Project consisted of the removal and replacement of all of the curbs, gutters, and sidewalks in the entire neighborhood, new decorative, energy-efficient LED streetlight system to replace the old unreliable streetlights, reconstruction and repaving of all of the streets, including the installation of sub-drains beneath almost the entire new roadway section, and the installation of decorative intersection treatments at the request of the residents. There are several other aspects of the Phase 4 project that I think are worth noting as well. The previous phases of the project constructed much of the underground storm drainage facilities, but didn't finish them at the road surface. The prior projects did this intentionally as we were still in discussions with the residents regarding the inclusion of traffic calming measures, items such as bulb outs and planters and other aesthetic features that impacted the surface location of the ultimate catch basins and other storm drain facilities. However, once that concept of the bulb outs and the decorative treatments was abandoned, the Phase 4 project proceeded, and it had to match the underground infrastructure to the surface improvements. Secondly, this project touched the private property and improvements of all 375 homes within the neighborhood. Each home's interface with the new sidewalk was different and included landscaping, driveways, walkways, pavers, stones, cobbles, retaining walls, decorative brick walls, and many other unique features, that were individual to each home. Private drainage from roof downspouts and yards also had to be accommodated. So anticipating the question of why the project took 3.5 years to complete, the answers are many and include the difficulty and complexity of replacing and constructing infrastructure of this magnitude in a fully occupied neighborhood was underestimated by the contractor and, quite frankly, probably by staff as well. Keeping access to residences while new driveways, utilities, and new roadways were constructed proved to be much more time-consuming than was anticipated. The project was further delayed at the beginning due to conflicts immediately after construction started with the existing gas line and the new streetlight foundations, and that required a redesign of the streetlight system while we were in construction. The contractor also experienced some cracking issues in portions of the completed concrete work after he had replaced much of the sidewalk and curb and gutter area, and we would not let him proceed to paving until this work was corrected. That was a further delay in the project. Additionally, weather was a factor as we endured 2 very lengthy and heavy winters. The project completion was delayed due to numerous punch list items as well, related to surface restoration at the individual residences, remedial paving work was also required in several areas because we had failed subgrade beneath the new roadway. We tried to remove as much of that as possible during construction, but that was part of the reason why we added all these new subdrains in that neighborhood. Is there's so much subsurface water and springs in that neighborhood that we were successful in accomplishing most of it, but there was a few locations that had to come back with a little bit of remedial work. So with all of that said, here's a summary of the project at its completion. The original contract was $9.77 million. We added about a 10% construction contingency, anticipating the complexity of the project. That gave us a total authorized construction budget of $10.75 million. The final base contract amount, which is adjusted downwards because we had some adjustments in quantities of certain items and didn't construct a few of the contract items, was $9.4 million. We had change orders in the amount of about $740,000, which yields a final contract amount of $10.2 million. I won't go into a lot of detail. I'll wait and answer any questions you may have on the change orders. I think the staff report provided a fairly good level of detail on what those change orders were. But as we sit here today, all the construction has been completed. They've completed every punch list item with the exception of one residence that they still have to go out there and do a little bit of work on that they promised me they'll get done here in the next week or so. And the project is ready for final acceptance. So we're asking the City Council to accept the project as complete and authorize the notice of completion to be filed with the county and the release of any remaining retention. So with the closeout of the Phase 4 project, where does that put us in terms of the overall reconstruction trust? This is a chart of the expenditures that we shared with you in our last update last October. As you can see, the percentages are pretty self-explanatory. Almost 70% of the budget was spent on actual reconstruction and maintenance costs. Staff time, about 15% of the total budget. Professional services for the federal and state proceedings with the CPUC and the NTSB were another almost 13%, and 3.5% for administrative and other minor costs. Putting this into perspective in terms of the actual categories of expenses that were tracked throughout the life of the trust, it's summarized here in this chart. We previously provided the City Council with budget updates both in October of 2018 as well as in October of 2019. In 2018, the over budget amount was projected at $0.4 million, and last October, this amount had been lowered to about $600,000, a little less than $600,000. The final amount, based on what we're projecting here, will be almost $50,000 less than this. So last October, as I described, the City Council authorized two specific measures to balance the project budget for this overage that we have shown here. These included the transfer of funds from the Fire Station 52 Capital Fund, Fund 004, and from the Emergency Disaster Recovery Fund, Fund 190. The Fire Station 52 rebuild is a capital improvement project with a separate budget. Costs that were previously charged to the trust are legitimate project costs that should be assigned to the Fire Station 52 CIP. Staff has identified $100,726 of previous expenditures related to the reconstruction of the fire station that had been charged to the trust. These costs were primarily for geotechnical and geologic work for a fault rupture hazard analysis that was required due to the station's proximity to the San Andreas Fault. For the remaining shortfall, staff previously identified approximately $722,000 of costs paid by the trust against Fund 190, the Emergency Disaster Recovery Fund. This reserved amount is sufficient to cover the anticipated remaining shortfall, and this is consistent with the direction from the City Council last October. So assuming that the council approves the final closeout of the project tonight, what housekeeping items are still remaining to complete? Well, we're still awaiting final as-built record drawings to be prepared by our civil engineer. They're finalizing those as we speak. we had to wait until the Phase 4 project was completed to get those drawings over to them. We still have some residual vendor invoices that are remaining to be submitted and paid. And we have project archiving and filing that needs to occur. Jennifer will talk a little bit here in a minute about the closeout of the trust, but one of the requirements is that all records related to the project must be kept, so both physical and electronic. So all of these anticipated costs are included in the estimates to complete as shown on the previous chart. So after all the final payments have been processed and paid, the Finance Department staff will conduct a final reconciliation of cost and remaining budget and balances in the Emergency Disaster Recovery Fund in order to formally close the Crestmore CIP project and deactivate the fund. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to briefly discuss the closeout of the irrevocable trust.
Thank you, Harry. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Jennifer Dianos. I'm the Assistant to the City Manager for the City of San Bruno. I'm here this evening to give you just a brief overview of the closeout of the Crestmore Irrevocable Trust. The trust that Mr. Burrows briefly discussed in his comments earlier was established in March 2011. Trustee Michael Garvey managed the funds through the life of the trust. Earlier this year, in February 2020, the trust was fully depleted with the expenditures that we incurred through the life of the project. Requests for reimbursement for expenditures were submitted to the trustee once, twice, sometimes 3 times a year over the last 9 or so years. Each request for reimbursement was audited by Trustee Garvey, and those reimbursements with all of the supporting documentation is on file in City Hall and are all considered permanent record per our city's retention policy, just as Mr. Burrows referred to. Following the depletion of the trust funds, Trustee Garvey worked to conduct a final audit of the account, including all disbursements and replenishments of funds, and formally closed the trust account out with a 0 balance as of February. Trustee Garvey provided a final financial closeout report and submitted the final report to the City of San Bruno and to PG&E. This report is in compliance with the March 2011 agreement. A short reconciliation of the account along with the expenditure categories and totals of each of the categories that Mr. Burrows referred to this evening are available on the city's website at sanbruno.ca.gov under the Crestmore Neighborhood Glenview Fire tab. That concludes my short presentation this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Mr. Burrows.
Well, did you have anything else?
Sorry, no, I lost my connection.
Mr. Burrows lost his connection, so he is here and available. Mr. Burrows, anyway, the request to the City Council adopt resolutions accepting the Phase 4 street improvement project as complete, authorizing the filing of the notice of completion with the San Mateo County Records Office, and authorizing the release of withheld retention in the amount of $168,977, and accepting the final report on the closeout of the overall Crestmore reconstruction project and the Crestmore Trust. And so that is the request of the City Council, concluding Mr. Burrows' report, and he and Jennifer are here for any questions for Council. Councilmember Medina.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, and thank you for the report, Harry. I'm sure we're all relieved. One simple question. Nice mask, Mr. Mayor.
Well, now we're both in the room, so it's recorded.
Yeah, good. So the one resident that hasn't had their work completed yet, promises don't work really well in my book. What happens if it just doesn't get done, and how much is of the value of the work?
Well, the value of the work is probably less than $500. It's a small retaining wall drainage issue that needs to just get some remedial work done. So the contractor, the contractor has given me his word. We had some fairly intense negotiations here as the project closed out. As you can imagine, on a $10.2 million project, there's a lot of loose ends that need to get tied up. So I hear what you're saying, but I will do my best to make sure that the work occurs.
No, that's understandable without knowing how much it was and being it so small. It's more understandable. Hopefully, they'll follow through, right? Otherwise, I guess you'll be fixing it.
You and I out there on the weekend.
No, I can't. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from council members?
To the chair.
Councilmember Davis.
So I guess it would be a good time, since we're wrapping this up, what are some big lessons learned? I mean, I heard you say that the reconstruction and maintenance cost was really it's probably the biggest hurdle to get through and a lot of challenges. But in looking at slide 10, where you list your overall cost by staff time, community outreach, et cetera, were there estimated goals or targets for those, or did we go down a territory where we didn't really have estimated budgets for each of those line items?
Well, I can only speak really to the reconstruction efforts, but what my thoughts are on the other costs were going into this, and Mark Zapparano can probably add some more flavor to this, but going into 2011 and the establishment of the $50 million reconstruction trust, there was a lot of unknowns related to what efforts were going to have to be undertaken in terms of the legal proceedings. So I believe that was a little bit of an unknown in terms of budget. We obviously had some budget creep because of the length of the project, duration of the project in terms of construction. And then, as described previously to the council, we had one project where we went back and constructed private sewer laterals in the entire neighborhood with some of the funds, and that was a little problematic because we're on private property, which isn't typical for a city to be on private property constructing public improvements or constructing private improvements. So those were probably, from my perspective, the biggest lessons. But I'll let Mark maybe speak to the proceedings.
Sure, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Please, Mr. City Attorney.
So there are so many lessons learned. We could probably do an entire presentation on it. And so, given the late hour, I'll only mention a couple of them, having been at the city since February of 2011, which was just about 5 months after the explosion, and being involved in the setting up of the trust and working through that. I think it's fair to say that the city expected that the work that was necessary to rehabilitate the neighborhood would be completed or would have been completed sooner. But I think Mr. Burrows is correct that there were a number of decisions made along the way to do work on private property, which was unusual and extended the process. But also a decision was made early on in the process, not just to repair and restore the facilities that were directly affected by the fire, but to return the neighborhood, to completely rejuvenate the entire neighborhood, regardless of whether the homes and infrastructure were affected, so that way residents could return back to a neighborhood that was completely new, completely modern, and completely brought up to date. And I think that was everything that we saw after that was a consequence of that initial decision. And then the only other comment I'd make about the various legal proceedings is, again, I think the city believed that it was those proceedings were over would have been over in 2015. But in fact, it turned out that through the efforts of city staff and consultants, that irregularities were discovered in the CPUC and with PG&E, and that resulted in a cascade of additional information and work that really the city did not anticipate and could never have anticipated, and nor could we have anticipated the benefits to the city that those discoveries procured. And so, for example, those benefits included, of course, not only the $120 million with the $70 million restitution and the $50 million trust, but also the addition of $6 million for the ex parte violations, an additional $1 million on top of that for additional ex parte violations that were discovered, and most recently, the $3 million that was contributed by PG&E for use by the city in the Crestmore Canyon. So all of those benefits far outweighed and outstripped really any expenditure of either professional fees or services or administration fees in the fund. And when you add it all up, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, the city ended up spending less than 5% of the total amount of its recovery on those fees. And I don't know about you, but I don't know where you can find a good lawyer and good consultants for a 5% contingency fee. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Well said, Mark.
Any other questions or comments from council? We're not seeing any. Vice Mayor Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to comment that, this has been a long time coming, and I know that there was a lot of frustration in the neighborhood with how long this whole took, and I wanted to offer my personal apology to the residents of the neighborhood for the delays and for having this drag on for so long. The neighborhood is transformed, and we did use an opportunity that we had to use this money and turn this tragedy that we went through into something positive. And what we were able to do there with renovating that entire neighborhood and creating a brand new park, it's something that we wouldn't have had an opportunity to do otherwise. We're not talking about not being able to pave streets and not being able to do some of the things that we'd love to do in all the neighborhoods, but here was a unique opportunity to do that. Yet for a decade, this neighborhood had to put up with all the construction and torn up roads and things shifting around, and and it definitely was not well thought out. I think in the beginning we identified opportunities as we went along, and that definitely it's scope creep, and it led to budget creep, and that's definitely part of the problem. But in the end, we were looking to do what was best for the neighborhood. And when we started replacing sewer mains, it only made sense to do the laterals. And when we did that, it only made sense to fix sidewalks and to fix ramps and to do pavement. And so it grew. And ultimately, we were able to provide that neighborhood with some really, really beautiful improvements. I'm glad we're finally done. Like I said, I do want to apologize to the neighborhood for having taken so long to get it completed, but I am glad that we were here, and want to thank staff and Mr. Burrows for all the work that went into getting us to this point.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other comments from council this time? I also wanted to check to see if we had anybody from the audience. I'm not seeing any hands, and Melissa will correct me, but I do not see any at this time.
No, there are no hands up.
Thank you. Any other council members? Okay, if not, okay. Councilmember Mason, if there's any others who are going to speak, please raise your hand, and then I will conclude, and then we'll go back to action.
Yeah, this is going to be an action item, right?
It will be, yes.
Okay, so then I just for purposes of the record, I just want to say that, I had really never walked in this area until the campaign. And one of the first houses that I went to, a woman opened the door and started crying when she told me about the loss of a dear friend of hers in the fire. And it was very clear, if not clear before, how open the wound is still here in San Bruno. In looking at tonight's report and just really realizing the very small impact that I've had in only 6 months on what's going on, where this council has been here for at least 4 years, I just don't feel like I have enough information around this incredibly complex issue to vote on this tonight. So I just wanted to let everybody know for the record that I will be abstaining from this vote. And there's really no comment one way or the other from me. I just want to let you know that the reason is I just feel it's really too complex for someone who's been on the council for 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you for letting us know that. I appreciate it. I'm not going to echo all that was said, but I will say that being there on the Hill with then the mayor, Ruane, was something to witness. To seeing the injured, to going to the hospital, to the burn wards. I just spoke to, less than 2 weeks ago, Mr. Craig. One of those lots are the park next to the Bullis up top. He lost his wife and he lost his daughter that night because he and his other daughter were at a back to school night. And we hadn't talked in some time, and he's ever been back. His daughter today, the surviving daughter, is a school teacher. And, it has been a very painful time. His wife and daughter were the first funeral that I attended at St. Cecilia's in San Francisco, where she was involved with the school and to see all the classmates. This is something truly, when it transpired, which there was no blueprint, there was no training, there was no way to prepare or plan of what it would take to reconstruct a neighborhood. One of the commitments that was said back then was, we will be here for you. And if that means holding your hand, if that means a hug, whatever it means, we'll get through it together. And to Vice Mayor's point, they have been resilient, courageous, and patient. And this is something that when this community faces these unique challenges at unprecedented times, it rallies, it comes together, and the outpouring. And so, it is one of those things that people do want to turn the page, but not forget those 8 that were killed, nor what this community faced, but how it faced it. So I know it's been a long time, and I'm glad that we're here at this point before our 10th year. So with that, we have a resolution to accept Phase 4 and to accept the final report of the closeout. So is there any action from council?
I move we accept the resolution, approve the resolution accepting Phase 4 street improvement project as complete.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, and the mask is off because Mr. Bruno left. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Mason is abstained. Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar.
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Burrows.
There's a second resolution.
City Attorney, can that be done? Was that okay to do it one, or do we have to do it separate?
I think we have 2 resolutions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Vice Mayor. So the second one will be accepting the final report. Is there action?
I move that we approve the second resolution. And then this one is to close out the overall project.
Yes.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Mason is abstained. Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar.
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye, and just to confirm to Councilmember Mason, she had articulated, I know she didn't say the words abstain, but to abstain to both items that we just passed resolution. She's nodding in the affirmative. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to conduct of business item B. Consider adopting a resolution amending the bylaws of the Citizens Revenue Measure Oversight Committee to increase the number of members from 5 to 7, and consider appointing 2 additional members. Finance Director, you're back.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Members of the City Council, Keith DeMartini, your Finance Director. I have a short presentation this evening on this topic as the presentation is being shared. Okay, the agenda for tonight's short presentation is to provide an objective for the evening, to provide a very short update on the committee to date, and then review the request to council to consider adding additional members, and then take your questions. So the objective of the item before you this evening is to consider adopting a resolution amending the bylaws of the Citizens Revenue Measure Oversight Committee to increase the number of members from 5 to 7, and then also consider appointing 2 additional members this evening. So this slide just provides a very brief update of the committee that was established by the City Council back in January of this year. On June 10th, the City Council interviewed the committee applicants, and then the next night, the City Council appointed 5 members to the committee, and then requested that staff bring an item to the next City Council meeting, which is tonight, to consider amending the bylaws to increase the number of members. Since that meeting, as I mentioned in the previous budget presentation, the committee held its first meeting with staff to review the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget and the Measure G allocations last Monday on June 15th. It is to be determined at this time when the next immediate meetings will be held with the committee. There will be a need to meet with them to provide a Brown Act training. And then it was also discussed at the first meeting that staff would like to present the street program funding presentation to this committee. That was also presented to the City Council during one of the budget study sessions. The next regularly scheduled committee meeting it seems like it's far away, but it's actually per the bylaws. It will be held on January 13th of 2021, and that is the annual meeting where the committee will review the audited financial statement for the Measure G fund for the prior year. So that will be for fiscal year 1920, the current year. So the council may consider adding additional members at this time. The ordinance that established the committee, with the creation of Measure G, it requires no less than 5 members. The bylaws that the City Council adopted back in January, it authorized 5 members for this committee. So the City Council may increase the number of members by amending the bylaws and adopting a resolution this evening. And you may also consider appointing additional members tonight, if you choose to do so, among the pool of candidates that you have previously interviewed. So tonight, you may consider adopting a resolution, increasing the number of members, and then also appointing 2 from the existing applicant pool. That concludes my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Director. And if you could take the slide presentation down. And are there questions or comments from council? Councilmember Mason.
I was just curious how staff came up with the number 5 in the original bylaws. And I only asked because I looked up the Community Foundation, and it currently has, I believe, 7, and their bylaws say no fewer than 5 and not more than 11. The Measure X committee currently has 7, and their bylaws call for a minimum of 7. And the Measure N countywide committee has 7 members. So how did 5 become the number?
Good question. I would say there's no science to 5. While I believe you're correct in all of the boards and commissions that you mentioned that have more than 5, most of our boards and commissions actually have 5. And that is typically, I think, reflective of the number of city council members, even though we are not in districts and there are not individual appointees from each council member. But most of our boards and commissions for the city are made up of 5 people.
Any other questions, Linda?
Not yet. I may have some comments, but I'd like to hear from fellow council members. I think we all agreed to have this on the agenda tonight after all the candidates that we had, so I'm curious to hear from the other council members.
Yep, well, Councilmember Medina is waiting. His hand is up. Councilmember.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was a good idea when we were getting ready to make the appointments, but it was kind of out of order. And it's still a good idea to I think, have a few more members on that committee. We are not setting a precedent. So I'm in favor of increasing it to 7.
Any other comments or questions from council? Okay.
Through the chair.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, so just a couple of comments. I thought it would be a good idea to revisit this. I went back to review what we had done in the previous single meeting that we had to discuss the committee, and it did seem kind of rushed. We only had one run at it, so staff brought us the bylaws and we debated a few points, but the number of participants or the number of members on the committee wasn't one of the things that was readily discussed. So I thought maybe an opportunity to revisit that would be appropriate. I didn't feel that it was appropriate during the appointment session to sort of try to rush that in, but I did agree that I would support having the discussion come back, and we can definitely discuss the pros and cons of why one number would be better than another. So I don't know necessarily that we need to make it bigger. I know that scheduling becomes an issue as your body grows and you need to account for more people's schedules, and you could potentially run into that. We did have a number of very well qualified candidates interview for slots, and while it would be great to just appoint everyone, I don't know that just the fact that we have more capable candidates is necessarily a reason for increasing the number. But I'm open to hear arguments on why it necessarily is a better situation.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from council?
Well, is there going to be a public comment on that?
I was going to ask, but I just wanted to make sure before.
I'll wait.
Okay. City, thank you, everybody. I don't see any. I just was checking. City Clerk, you can just confirm that I'm not overlooking.
No, there are no hands up.
Okay. So we're back to council. All public has been asked. There are no hands. So, Councilmember Mason, you said you had comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just have some concerns over just the how this all kind of came about. Initially, I think every council member here has stated that they felt all the candidates were qualified. And so after our, I believe it was the January meeting or the February meeting when the bylaws were in place and the application period was opened, it had seemed odd to me that that there was no interviews and that there was no committee selected. For months, within days of making the statement at the council meeting, interviews were scheduled, and that was the statement that I didn't feel comfortable approving the budget, and I think that was backed by other council members as well, without having a committee in place. Just as quickly as the interviews were scheduled, they were canceled. The application pool was immediately opened again for new applicants. 5 additional applications were received the second time the application pool was opened. This time, interviews were scheduled within 9 days of receipt. Of the 5 selected, 3 were submitted after the new application period was opened. This is the majority of votes needed for approval of any recommendation or action item. Although all council members have expressed how qualified all the candidates were, it remains unclear why we needed to reopen the candidate list that had been delayed for months without an oversight committee being appointed. What was clear is that some of those individuals who did apply initially openly and actively supported 2 council members here during campaign period. I urge my fellow council members tonight to allow for an additional 2 seats to the council to ensure that we bring different voices to the table. To be clear, those selected are qualified. That's not the issue here. All council members have agreed to this. But all council members also agreed that all candidates were qualified, yet still opened the wait list for additional applicants who ultimately made up the majority of the Measure G committee. These individuals will be responsible for reviewing the audit of $4 million and ensuring funds are properly expended for their intended purposes. The trust of our community relies on us being more inclusive, allowing every part of our community to have a voice and to be a part of the process. I urge the council to expand the number of seats to at least 7 for a more inclusive board. one that includes individuals of different ages and backgrounds that have young children in our community, that are coming of age in our community, and that have complaints and want to be part of the solution. I hope that all of us want to be part of a more inclusive system that allows everyone who applies on time and qualifies a voice at the table, not just those who we open the wait lists for when we disagree with the politics of the others who have already applied the first time on time. Thank you for those who are serving on the Measure G committee. I do support you, and I hope to get you some more voices at the table to represent the entire gamut of the San Bruno community. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments from council?
Okay. Chair?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor.
I'm not sure if I misheard that, but that almost sounded like an accusation of some kind of impropriety in the process. And I just wanted to say that I never saw any of the applications that came in initially. So I have no idea who applied in the first batch or in the second batch. I don't know that that list was provided to any of the council members. And so if it's being suggested that there was pressure to allow other people to apply and then those people were given favoritism, I just want to go on the record saying that is absolutely not true. And I, for one, did not have any knowledge of who applied when or who those people were until the list was provided just before the interviews.
Okay.
And I'll comment on that. I agree 110%. In fact, many committees, I know that through the city clerk's office, they continue to stay open because we don't get enough candidates and things get moved. I mean, I saw no problem with the process. Kudos to staff for getting everybody together, but I think part of the problem with us meeting was our schedules, the 5 of us. We couldn't commit to a date to be available for interviews. So there was just multiple problems and complexities. And I think in the end, you know, we got together and we had several meetings in a row during a very busy week. I mean, I think we spent 40 hours at city council meeting that week to make sure we included and had interviews for all candidates. So nothing was approved without the review. I don't know. I don't know what you're trying to say or who you're trying to point fingers to, but
A date was.
Hold on, council member.
Councilmember
Davis has the floor. Okay, she just, Councilmember Medina has his hand up, both on virtual and in person.
Got it. I don't want to think about anything to do about the process. What's important to me was having more representation from our community on a very, very important matter, which was brand new, and there's no precedent. So I don't understand I haven't heard a good reason of the objection to why it shouldn't be 7. Does that mean that we should reduce the planning commission down to 5? Absolutely not. So why wouldn't we allow 7 here?
Well, I do know there was a time too when we were appointing for the community foundation, there was a suggestion by a council member to move that to 9, the night of appointments. So that suggestion did come up at another time. So, but just for historical purposes, I do see council 7. Oh,
we're not talking about 9.
No, it was brought up at that night when we were appointing the qualified candidates to move it from 7 to 9. That's when the president, then Mr. Headley, came to the mic and made some statements or comments. Council member Davis, you have your hand up.
I don't think that we're ever going to have a good representation of the community, right? Because you can't do it with 5 members or 7 members. It doesn't really make a difference. I represent water utility companies all throughout California and probably spent the last week asking everybody who I talk to. It does range. It's everywhere between 5 and probably 9 is what you see. So I don't know that 5 is wrong. I don't know that 7 is wrong. I don't know that 7 is right. I don't know that 5 is wrong. So how about we go back to the committee that exists and say, hey, do you guys feel that 5 committee members is enough to make a decision or represent the committee? I mean, I watched the meeting, every moment of the meeting that they had, and I thought it was really well done. I thought Vaughn had a great comment. Everybody else concurred. It was like, yes. In fact, I thought we as a council made that same comment about that $44,000. So, I mean, I think you've got a good representation of people who are very intelligent. I mean, we're very lucky to have who we have on that committee. So, I don't know. I'm not swayed one way or the other. I don't really know.
I would say that,
Councilmember Mason.
Yeah, I don't know who made this process. I didn't see any of the applications. It was clear to me sitting in the interviews that as we were seeing different names and different votes, that they were definitely aligning in a certain way, as I just stated. And I think that we just had an entire speech around systems and that we're going to reflect on the systems that we create. And to be clear, our council is creating these systems now as we speak. And when I look at the council, I don't see a diverse council. I don't see a diverse committee. And I think it's important that we let other voices in. And I think that's up to us to do. And I don't think it hurts any of us to add more people to the committee. It only adds more voices. It doesn't take away from what's been created. And to ask the council that was selected 2 weeks ago, this is one of the reasons we were elected, as Councilmember Salazar said a couple weeks ago. I mean, these are the decisions we're selected to make.
And I think we did make modifications to the process as far as that we had to do a second round, but as far as the appointment and the nominations and the votes, so that it wasn't perceived right or wrong first out of the chute, right? And then all of a sudden there's 3 votes and it's done. So things did change, things were modified, and so anyway, and I think, and I know your intention is not to say we're going to bring more folks to the table so it's more diverse or better representation. I know that's not what you mean, but I'm listening to it, and I'm telling you, as I'm on the committee, I might feel that. I know that's not what you intended or meant.
I want to be clear, that is what I intended. I want to be clear. We need more diversity in our committee, and I think that that could come in very different ways. But that is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for clearing that up. Okay. Is there any other? I'm going to check the hands. Is there any other comments or? Maybe. Okay. So what it is this is under item B. Is there any action to amend the resolution, amend the bylaws to go from 5 to 7, and that's the resolution that would need a motion and a second and a roll call.
So I would motion to go from 5 to 7 committee members.
Is there a second? Motion made and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
No.
Councilmember Mason?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
No.
Mayor Medina?
No.
Motion fails.
But I appreciate it being brought forward and in this forum so that, that it had a good forthright discussion. So thank you. And again, and I believe in any of our groups, the groups can come forward, any of our committee commissions and boards, and ask for consideration of an amended bylaw too. That's been done, that I know, in the history of committee commissions and boards being around. They've lowered them. Personnel boards at 3, they used to be at 7, they're at 5. So there's a variety, and sometimes anyway, so that is something else. With that said, we're going to move on to council member comments from council members. First one is Linda Mason, identify the options for the San Bruno cable, including a loan, market correction, or no action. Council member Mason.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, there's a study session that's going to be coming from staff on San Bruno cable, and I just want to make sure that given I feel we're at a really urgent time in the business plan, that we really need to have some meaningful conversation around what the options are, and that includes a loan, that includes what I would call a market correction. My understanding is that for many years, the city had taken money from the San Bruno Cable Enterprise and placed it into the general fund to assist the city. And so since we have continued doing that, that's essentially taken funds from what could have been reinvested into San Bruno Cable for things like fiber. Is there a way to essentially correct that to say, I think often it's referred to as the cable is a debt to the city in some ways, but in a lot of ways, the cable company really helped the city for years. And if we added that money up, is that money that we're essentially could repay the cable? Because all the other enterprises, from what I've learned, are essentially treated as if they are their own business, except what seems to be the cable business. So I'm calling that a market correction, but again, I would need to know more about this. And then within that same study session, if we could also get some numbers on Shelter Creek and Peninsula Place, what were their numbers of those who were using CityNet before and then after fiber, to see what are the realistic numbers that we would be looking at if we could get the money and could put fiber throughout. I hadn't thought of Mr. Mersney's comment earlier today, but I think that would be something to consider. But I just want to make sure we have some real tangible decisions that we can make around cable really in the next year.
Yeah, and to add on that for the number element, and I just want to clarify, but I think in Shelter Creek, I think it's us only. So is my understanding when we did the fiber, that was kind of that they wanted us in, we're holding off on others. So in essence, if there's only one choice, that's going to be a little skewed in a sense. It's a great thing for us, but it could be skewed as if they had other options. But anyway, City Manager, did you have any comments or follow up on that, please?
No significant comment or follow-up at this time. I believe it's a request for items to be talked about at a study session that we will be scheduling. I think all of those questions, some of which can be answered very easily, others will require some analysis, but I think we can have an in-depth conversation about the city's cable department at the appropriate time.
Does that answer that? I mean, is that?
Yeah, that's fine. And like I said, I know that we're in budget season. I'm not in a rush. I think time is of essence, but I do also have to say that I understand we're in budget season, and just when that study session comes to us, if we can have all this information within that study session, because that's already happening.
If I can, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, please.
So it will very likely be a series of study sessions. It is not something that we can cover in one night. And I understand Councilmember Mason's request. In our one-on-one, she did talk to me about them. What I'll say is, in the conversations that we will have on the cable enterprise, in that first study session, I think we should talk about really the questions that the City Council wants analyzed and looked into, and get direction from the full City Council at that time. Some of them may require easy answers, others will be a significant effort. But I believe our overall goal is to frankly decide the course of our cable enterprise and identify any and all ways to proceed with the gigabit fiber project.
Councilmember Medina.
Right. Thank you for that answer, City Manager Grogan. It's something that we, as a council, are aware that we need to have this discussion. During our priority strategy session, we talked, and any idea when that would be possible, City Manager?
To hold the study session?
Right.
I do not have a date at this time, but I can tell council it likely will not be before September, but I do think between the September-November timeframe is enough time for us to appropriately plan for it and to have that discussion.
Okay, any other questions or comments on this? For council, for the anybody else, if the mic goes off, meaning your mic is live, I'm going to assume that you have a comment that you'd like to offer, so you don't have to raise your hand. So, any members? First, Councilmember Medina.
Yes, thank you very much. Two comments, announcements. One is Second Harvest Food Bank distribution will occur on Thursday at Bel Air School. People can call 1-800-984-3663 and sign up. They do take sign-ups there in person, but it's a great way to make sure you get some food if you're in the need of it. The other thing I wanted to do was personally thank our city manager for his very profound personal story in his city newsletter. I recommend everybody to take a look at it and subscribe to the newsletter. So thank you very much, City Manager Grogan.
Is there anybody else on the council that has any comments? Seeing no other mics off, last call. I think just in closing, I think the council, I'm sure we already have, but want to thank the finance department, thank the director of the finance department, the city manager, and all the department heads, the senior leadership team, Jennifer, for all the work and the effort of putting this together in some really unique times of trying to get all the data and the Zoom meetings to put this together to get it to us. And so we appreciate that. So with that said, thank you to my colleagues for that, because I know we're going to be seeing each other the next couple nights too. So with that said, we're going to have adjournment to the next regular city council meeting, which will be held on July 14th at 7 p.m. Wish everybody the best. Stay healthy, stay strong. Please social distance and wear your mask. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.